Well, no, that's 7, and then Clark and Forrest.
So who are the two?
8.
So who are the 3 we're missing? That were from Deb and Krista.
Deb and Krista.
Well, who's the 3rd?
You are.
Are we still 1 short?
We're still down. We're still down 1. Gotcha. There's everything. We're still short 1. Yeah.
We need a developer who doesn't build things for hands.
Right, or an architect who doesn't build stuff.
We do, actually. We've got 2 architects who both work for Wayne State, right? So both work very well. And Megan will be here tonight. But my friend Jeff was on the commission for a while because he was a developer in Ann Arbor. So he lived here, but he wasn't doing business.
Right.
So there wasn't any
The overlap.
issue, conflict.
Yeah, I'm actually fine right now. So.
Live in Ferndale, don't build in Ferndale.
We're entrepreneurs. I feel like an entrepreneur over there.
Yeah. Or,
Right.
local small business owner.
Yeah, because I did.
Who isn't on DDA
Municipality or just planners?
appearance review committee or one of the other things that we've already passed something before it came to us. I don't know.
Right.
I like have the intro stuff.
I'll keep my ears
Oh,
open.
yeah.
Right.
That's great.
I thought it was great, so I mentioned good.
Sorry, we're still waiting on Derek. Where's Derek?
There we go.
Yeah, that's exactly what
Mr. Delacourt, please come to the bells.
Oh, there he is. I'm like, where is he?
Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. We're just all neighbors.
I know.
We're all neighbors.
I understand.
Okay.
I don't like it either.
Okay. What do you mean you're a planner, for God's sake? Yeah.
Sit behind my...
She's looking for a bigger microphone.
Yeah, she has a gavel.
I'd like to call the... Are you ready? I'm sorry, I should have asked. You guys ready?
Closest part am I going to get?
I'd like to call the October 15th, 2014 Ferndale Planning Commission meeting to order. Can we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Azar, Commissioner Baker,
Here.
Commissioner Brazen, Commissioner Farr,
Here.
Commissioner Priana,
Here.
Commissioner Tomrowski,
Here.
Commissioner Ventrano,
Here.
Chair Bodeker.
Here. Can I have a motion to excuse Commissioner Czar and Brazen?
So moved. Support.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. They're excused. Motion passes. Approval of the agenda. Any modifications to our agenda tonight?
No, ma'am.
I'll take a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
I would move that we approve the agenda as submitted.
Support?
Support.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, next up, approval of the minutes from the September 11th, 2014. Notice we got an email kind of a couple hours ago with a couple changes.
Just a change on number 11
Just clarifying one of the conditions of approval.
on the bike.
Okay. I don't know if anyone had a chance to review those or has any edits or comments on them. Otherwise, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes as submitted with the changes noted in the recent email.
What was the change to the bike rack?
It was on page 4.
Yep. Oh, on page 4. I'm sorry, I'm on
Page 4, third paragraph. It was just clarification.
Page 4 of the findings.
Of the minutes.
Of the minutes.
Right,
Oh,
so it's
page
page 7
8.
of the document. I got it. Yep, yep.
7.
Okay. Commissioner Chapman?
Do we have a motion to approve with that amendment?
So moved.
Support?
Support.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, minutes are approved, which brings us to the heart of our meeting. We have new business. We do have a public hearing this evening. For our public hearing, if anyone's here to speak on that, we ask that you come to the podium and state your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and hear from staff to introduce the subject, and if the applicant has anything they'd like to add, they're welcome to do so. Following the public hearing, we'll bring it back to the Planning Commission for deliberation and decision. So with that, are you going to introduce this, Derek? Or?
Yeah, I will. Good evening, Chair and Planning Commission. In front of you tonight is a request for a special land use approval for the property located at 1696 Wordsworth. The applicant is requesting a special land use approval for an expanded daycare operation. The applicant is currently and has historically run a daycare operation with 6 or less children, which is permissible by state law. And does not require any additional zoning approvals. But once you do change the state license from that more than 6, less than 12 category, Both the requirements of our zoning ordinance kick in, and a special land use permit is required per our ordinance. As the Planning Commission is aware, there are several specific criteria associated with a special land use and the general requirements for a daycare, both of which and those criteria have been identified in the staff report that's been provided to you prior to the meeting. The applicant has been working with the state, and I'll have them come up in a second and explain, but I do believe they either have or are pretty close to securing a license with the state for the expanded operations. The site is capable and does appear to meet the requirements of the city's ordinance for general requirements for a daycare center. We are here recommending approval of the special land use permit, and we did include a mortgage survey or survey of the site that in basic appears to represent that the requirements for that general operations are approved. We're recommending that be approved as the site plan associated with the special land use, because there are no changes being proposed to the site to support the operation. It is a residentially zoned piece of property. So with that, we'd ask the applicants to come up and this is their first time doing this, so it's all we need is to start is a brief description of your operation, what it's been like in the past, and what it is you guys are proposing to go forward. Unless there's any question for staff right now, I'd turn it over to them.
Thank you.
Hello. Amanda Hahn, 1696 Wordsworth. I'm a daycare provider. I have 6 kids trying to fight for 12. I'm licensed. Kids come different times. They're not always there at the same time. What else?
How long have you been in operation?
A year and a half.
And do you let them know have you secured your state license yet, or is that in process?
You have to get approved from the city first.
Okay.
Great. I think that's it for now. We'll open up the public hearing, and then we might bring it back up for specific questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I would point out in the packet as well, the applicant did submit a letter that appears to have been signed by the majority of her neighbors within close proximity to the property regarding the increasing use. And as I said before, it appears they meet the requirements of the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the public hearing. Again, anyone who's in the audience that wishes to speak to this, please step to the podium, state your address, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Rudy Serra. I live at 1705 Wordsworth Street in Ferndale. That's kitty corner across the street from the folks you just heard from. I'm one of the folks who signed the letter. I'm here to tell you they've been responsible, wonderful neighbors. There's never been any problem with their work, with their property. I work at home usually. I'm there a lot, so I would be aware if there were any disturbances. I've talked with other neighbors. We're very supportive because we feel that they've been responsible with everything they've done. There's never been any problem of any kind. So we'd like you to support their request.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the public who wishes to make comment of this request? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the Planning Commission for discussion, deliberation, and questions. Derek, just remind me really quick, obviously there's the state regulations and we have the requirements for the daycares. Does this fall under our home occupations as well?
No, because there is a separate section of the ordinance that specifically deals with it. Home occupations are uses that don't require any additional zoning approval, are allowed by right as long as they operate within the constraints of those criteria.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I guess I would like to invite you back up, if you don't mind. I think we'll probably have some additional questions for you. I don't know, does anyone have any that want to start with? Otherwise, I can, start with some couple questions that I have. In going from 6 to 12 children, are you anticipating any additional employees at your house? Yeah. Is it just you, or who's going to? I guess there'll be one staff person that will be covering.
Yeah.
Okay. And I believe I think I saw in your application, that I think some of the concerns about parking. Obviously, when you have 6 children versus 12, that's twice as many. I mean, hopefully some of them are siblings or come from the same homes, but I guess I'm just maybe want to speak if you thought about how you'd address, if, I would imagine most people come, drop off their kids during their work day, which tends to be, 8 to 5 with some variation, but if you have 4 cars coming all at once, I'm not sure what the on-street parking situation is on your street.
Driveway.
Yeah, it's a double wide driveway that goes from the street all the way back to the garage. You can probably fit at least 6 cars, 6 to 7 cars
Okay.
Through the chair, can you park on your side of the street as well? Can you park on both sides of Ward
Yeah,
Street?
you
I
can
thought
park
so.
on both sides. The street's probably one of the widest streets.
It's a big one, yeah.
Okay. All right, in terms of the actual, so there's state regulations regarding outdoor play area, if I recall correctly. So is that per child, or is that just a general
I
square
believe
footage?
the
if I
state has a
recall?
per child that they administer. Our ordinance requires a minimum of 300 square feet.
Right, that did seem pretty low. So in terms of the state requirements, I think, isn't there a per child requirement? And have you guys can map that out and ensure that I guess, I'm assuming your backyard,
They
that
have
is,
to come out to do that too, the state does. So-
okay, so that's, I'm assuming fenced in
Yeah,
and
yeah.
ample to handle the amount of square footage per child?
Yeah,
When they came out the first time, they said that we would be approved for 12, that we fit all the criteria, we just got to get the okay from the city.
Okay. And I appreciate the petition you guys submitted. And without looking at, did you speak to all of your immediate neighbors in terms of the left and right and the people that your backyard shares?
not backyard.
Have you had any informal discussions or anything with them? I said, again, having the children out in the backyard, the people that live on Channing, I guess, would be, that have backyards that abut yours, if they have any thoughts for or against. So we didn't talk to them at all? Okay. Okay.
Do you use Wanda Park at all?
Yes.
Chair?
That's a good, yeah, I guess that's a good question. How often do you leave your property? I guess you do, so
Every day.
so you guys take walks in the neighborhood?
Yeah.
and- Okay. Okay, I mean, I think childcare is a growing need in Ferndale. I happen to know personally. It's hard to find.
Right here at the dais, eh?
Yeah. Do you already have anticipated fill? Do you have potential people who are already, I guess?
Waiting list, yes.
Okay. So obviously there's
This can't be
I know, I'm just saying, there is definitely a need for this in the community. I think the planning commission's role is to make sure that the use is not detrimental to any of the surrounding properties in terms of, health, safety, welfare. And so I think it's great that you got the petitions of the neighbors. I would have liked to see maybe some people from Channing, because I know the backyard, it will be amped up in terms of the outdoor activity. And, we in Ferndale tend to have smaller yards, and so I know I can see what's going on in my behind this neighbor's yard. And you have a privacy fence?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they can't see our yard at all.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions from other commissioners about operations or?
Yeah, I went to the chair. You mentioned hours. What is a typical day?
7:30 to 5:30.
Not very rarely, if ever, goes past 5:30. That's
Sometimes 6.
Okay.
Yeah, it's usually 5:30.
and you do expect 12 at a time.
Yep.
You're between those things. There probably will be 12 kids.
Yep.
Right.
And are you required to report out to the state in any way? I don't know the licensing process for being a in-home childcare provider.
They have to come out to measure everything and look at everything, and then I get their paper saying I'm licensed.
Okay. And do they do a yearly
Yeah,
review?
every
They do-
year.
Every year. Okay.
Yeah.
And you guys live in this residence as well? This is your primary residence that also serves as this purpose? I'm imagining that gets to be quite tight.
Yes.
During 8 a.m. and 6 p.m.
That's why they go to the park.
Yes.
Park time is good time.
Again, this is a public hearing, so as such, conditional land use, I'm assuming? Special land use?
Special land use,
So this is a
correct.
recommendation from the planning commission to council?
Correct.
So anything we make tonight will be a recommendation to council, then you'll go to the council meeting for their decision. I guess if there's any other questions or discussions from the commission, otherwise we can consider a motion.
I mean, and I would, through the chair, I can add that as staff, I know the applicants have met with us on several occasions, have considered this for a considerable amount of time, have looked at potential other locations and alternative locations. I do know from our inquiries that they have been meeting with the state and have had the state out. So we do make those calls ahead of time to make sure that they are at least in discussions with them ahead of time. So we've double-checked. We've never had a complaint from the city. We looked in regards to the existing operation, and we did notice all the residents immediately adjacent to and did not have any phone calls or concerns expressed to us as staff about either their existing operation or the expansion of the operation.
Okay, good to know.
I would move in the matter of 1696 Wordsworth, group residential daycare, that the Planning Commission recommend to City Council approval of the special land use based on plans dated, oh, there's a blank. Based on plans received and dated by the City Planning Department, with the findings as enumerated in the special land use motion. Number one, the proposed development does not detract from, erode, or reduce the desirability or economic viability of any residential or business uses within 2,500 feet of the proposed use. The site is designed, constructed, operated, and maintained so as to be harmonious with the existing or intended character of the general vicinity and will not change the essential character of the area. The site design of the proposed special land use shall minimize the impact of site activity on surrounding properties. Number three, the site is served adequately by existing public services and facilities and does not impose additional service demands upon the city that will not be adequately addressed by the applicant. Number four, the proposed improvement to the site does enhance the public health, safety, welfare, and economic benefit and the municipal purposes and policies of the city. Number five, the plans are consistent with the intent and purposes of this chapter and the objectives of the master plan and comply with all applicable state and federal laws.
Okay.
Do I have a second?
Second. Well, did I do that prematurely? Did we need to close the public hearing? I already did. Okay. Yeah. All right, so we have a motion by Baker, and I think I heard Farr first for second. Any discussion on the motion? Otherwise, we can do a voice vote. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes. We have a recommendation from Planning Commission to Council. I'm assuming it'll be on their next agenda, potentially?
We have a site plan.
I did include a site plan as well, but yeah, the special land use, if we have time, we'll get with you with the date. It'll either be on the next meeting or the first meeting in November, one of the two.
And that's for the special land use.
Correct.
And then, again, we also do have a site plan that's tied to the special land use, which is in the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. So I think we make the approval of that. Correct. So if you want to go ahead and make a motion for the site plan.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, now that I've just changed the page. I would move in the matter of 1696 Wordsworth, the group residential daycare, that the Planning Commission approve the site plan subject to the following conditions. Number one, the property shall be kept free of rubbish and debris and shall be maintained so as to present a neat and attractive appearance. There shall be an number two, there shall be an outdoor play area of at least 300 square feet provided on the premises. Said play area shall not be located in the front yard. Number three, the outdoor play areas shall be enclosed by a fence that is designed to discourage climbing. Important with 12 kids.
I don't know what that exactly means, barbed wire or...
that is at least 42 inches in height, but no higher than 6 feet. Number four, daycare centers shall open no earlier than 6 a.m. and shall close no later than 8 p.m. Number five, daycare centers shall comply with all of the applicable ordinances and with applicable state and federal laws. Any required licenses shall be posted in a conspicuous place on the premises. Number six, drop-off and pickup areas shall be provided. Drop-off and pickup areas shall be located in a manner which protects the safety of children, does not create traffic congestion on the site or within a public roadway, and are not disruptive to neighboring uses. It sounds like they will not be.
We have a motion by Baker. Do we have a second? Second. We have a second by, is it Tomrowski? Tomrowski. Okay. Any discussion on the motion? All right, we'll take a voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes on the site plan. So as long as you get your special land use from the council, you should be all set from our perspective. So good luck. Thank you. You're welcome.
Wasn't that painful?
You did great.
Okay, next up this evening, we have a site plan for the Black Owl. Let me pull up, where am I at here? I'm all lost. And I guess this is going to be introduced by Michelle?
Correct.
All right.
Good evening, Chair, Commission. So staff reviewed a site plan application for 345 East 9 Mile. It's actually the building across the street on the northwest corner of Leland and 9. So they're renovating the existing building and making changes to the parking lot. So it's actually miswrote in the staff review, but it's 10,850 square foot restaurant. It's a permitted use within the CBD. So staff reviewed for technical compliance, and the site plans meet all dimensional requirements. Part of the exterior renovations, as proposed, don't meet a requirement that we have for the CBD that requires 50% of windows along a wall facing a right-of-way within the CBD. However, it is an existing non-conforming building, but they are removing windows from that wall, so they're increasing the non-conformance. However, the Planning Commission does have the right to waive those requirements if they seek that. They did go to the Appearance Review Committee and were approved. I'm sure you've all looked at the plans and noticed that they're making major improvements to the site, and the DDA was very impressed with them as well. So the applicants worked with staff on the circulation of the parking lot quite a bit. They are making improvements with narrowing the drives and making one-way, but keeping the same ingress-egress, improving the landscaping, adding a bike rack. With those improvements, along with some additions to the building, they are going to lose 4 spaces. Now, within the CBD, they are exempt from parking requirements unless they remove parking spaces. But as staff, we suggest that we waive the requirement that they pay in lieu because of the improvements they're making to the site. And as provided in the packet, you'll see that they also have a parking agreement with Credit Union 1 to lease parking spaces across Leland Street. So, in addition, we plan on working as a city with them. In the spring, we're doing the 9-mile resurfacing, and so since the right-of-way goes actually up to the lot line on their building, they don't have the potential to do the hedgerow as required for the landscaping requirements. But they're willing to work with the city on the landscaping within the right-of-way and also with the curb cuts. When we do construction, they do provide the green wall elevations in the plans. That is something that we've talked with them about as the city staff. They've included that in the plans, but we have not come to any agreements with that, and so they'll actually have to come back, I believe, with those elevations, since we'll have to make an agreement since it's the courthouse wall and whatnot. Just to mention that, and then there isn't a condition on this staff review. However, I would add that we put a condition that the specifics of a grease trap be added and approved by staff for final approval. With that, I would ask, I guess, if Derek wanted to add anything, or the applicant is here to give their comments and answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you. Anything to add?
Nope.
Okay. I guess I ask the representative of the applicant to come up. And paper, rock, scissors, whatever works.
And all of us, or one of us?
3 of us, 7 of us, what you want?
Whoever tells the best story. You know.
Factual stories.
Yes, I think we talked about this project a while back, so I'm excited to see you guys come back. So Timmy, tell us what happened and what brought you here.
Originally, this project was slated to happen over on Woodford across the street from Toast. Right. We were unable to secure that particular building, and we decided to go back to the drawing board, and we were able to purchase the building across the street. So we felt that it was an improvement in the overall situation. It would have been a difficult parking situation around Woodward. There was limited parking. Then we would be dealing with the residents with parking on the streets. Across the street we have, I believe, 27 in our own lot. We have a 5-year agreement that we just signed with Credit Union 1 for the lot to the east of us. No. And I think there's 36 spots over there. So, we have a substantial amount of parking, plus the additional city parking, street parking, a lot here. in my experience in 14 years of being a restaurateur in Ferndale, it's probably the most parking that anyone's seen ever from a private perspective. So we're pretty excited about that. The project is a restaurant first. There's a bar component, but it is definitely a restaurant with a bar. There will be many improvements to the space. We're improving and increasing square footage as well. The 9 Mile face is going to be no longer painted white yellow brick. It will be resurfaced with reclaimed brick. New windows will be put in. The whole concept is kind of a Russell Industrial Center meets Henry Ford kind of original factory kind of feel. Steel, reclaimed brick, standing seam, zinc roof. We kind of wanted to emulate the heritage of Detroit with this building, and do something that really doesn't exist from our recollection in the area. And so we're pretty excited to put this project together. Everything is, most of the outside products, with the exception of the roof and the I-beams, are reclaimed. So we're going to bring back that kind of, it's been here for kind of 100 years kind of feel to the building, as if we had peeled off the bad surface and behind it was the great stuff behind it. So we're extending the west wall out. That's where the standing seam roof will be. That will be all glass on the front with the green wall on the street surface. And then it will wrap around with garage doors that will be glass that will be able to open up into the restaurant and out to the covered patio, which is inset in the building. And we did that purposely to kind of protect ourselves from sound and protect the environment from the neighbors directly behind us. We're also extending the building on the backside on the west, which will incorporate our beer cooler and some other additional storage, which will be also 2 stories. So we'll be raising the elevation on the back side to that, I think it's 18 feet. The front side is also going to be raised. We'll have a parapet that's probably going to be raised, I think, is it 4 or 5 feet, guys? Yeah, from where it is now. So instead of using traditional kind of what we think is cheesy looking screening, we decided to raise the parapet, bring the brick up, and hide all of the goodies behind the brick, as opposed to having that on the roof and being visible. So we'll also be adding a second story, which will be offices and storage. Because we don't have a basement, it makes it difficult for us to have space for some of the things we need to do from a restaurant operation. So the overall end square footage, I think, is 10,560, somewhere around there. It's currently somewhere around 7,800. Along Leland, we plan to paint the existing block, and we also plan to add some additional landscaping and architectural features to kind of break up. We're going to be removing a few windows on that side, which are like 1980s aluminum little square jobs that were inserted into the old window location. So we'll have that kind of juxtaposition of painted block and brick, kind of like how when you drive into Detroit, you'll see an old factory. They'll have the red brick with like the block, or the block with the red brick. They're kind of like blocked off the windows. So that's kind of our concept with that. We're going to be using that along the front of 9 Mile on that one front entrance. Essentially what we're trying to do is recreate that was once the entrance to the factory, if you will. It'll have an arch over the top. It'll be a reclaimed brick with the glazed kind of silo block on the front. And then as we go around the corner, it'll be the opposite. So we'll use that silo block to block in some faux windows on the additional spaces that we're adding, like, as I mentioned, to the west in the back for the liquor room and the beer cooler. So all of that will be encased in a brick building as opposed to just being, a walk-in cooler sitting outside.
Yeah. I had a question.
Parking lot, we plan on, we've talked with Derek probably for 3 years now, I think it's about the addition to the courthouse wall and making it a full green wall. So our goal with that is to grow Michigan-based hops that will vine and cascade up the side of the building with some street or fine art in the center. We've been working with Malt. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a street artist and a fine artist. He carries two personalities, very capable on either side. So we've been working with him on figuring out what it is we're going to do there. He's also going to be doing some different things throughout the building with some other artists as well. On the interior, we have incorporated the work of Chris Long's architectural firm. Has done a phenomenal job putting together the building, but in addition to what they're doing, we brought in Alex Morales, who's been doing some of the best places in Chicago from an interior design and artisan perspective. So he's crafting doors and tables and walls and different things from reclaimed wood and everything. So we put a lot into this project, a lot of thought. I think it's working on. I almost talked about 3 years now, so we're ready to get it going. So that's the overall kind of concept. The concept is the restaurant is essentially all about the craft. It's a chef-inspired restaurant. I hate to say farm to table, but it's fresh from the region. All of the foods and inspiration are from the region, from farms and from the forest, and the animals abound. The beverage program is from that perspective too. So from our own sodas and tonics and things of that nature. So we've really this has been a very thought out process. The concept that lives inside the building is very tied to the design. So it's congruent. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes overview of Black Owl.
Nice story.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. I guess with that, we'll take it to the Planning Commission for questions and comments. Does anyone want to lead us off, or I can go for it.
And I think that Derek helped me with a couple of these. My background's in planning, but not necessarily architecture, so I was a little bit confused about the second floor. I could tell there was going to be one, but I couldn't exactly tell what the use was. So it sounds like it is offices. It's not necessarily restaurant seating or anything that's open with sound.
It's not available to the patrons. It'll be the employee lockers, bathrooms, eating, dining area, back of house.
Okay.
That's basically on the back northeastern corner of the building, correct?
Yeah, the back, the northeast, like 40% of the current roof.
Yeah.
At that Leland and the alley corner.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yep.
And it won't be the whole building. It only extends forward.
Just over the kitchen. Yeah. So over the dining area, it does not exist.
Okay.
Yeah, that was clear. If we're talking about the back of the building, quick question about the back of the building. It looks like any sort of outdoor, we have I imagine that, I know the Blooms are familiar with this, but we have had a lot of conversation about sound and outdoor seating and patios and music, and I know that you guys have been very thoughtful, obviously, about how it's designed. So it looks like the outdoor seating is closer to 9 Mile rather than closer to the neighbors.
Yeah, it's all in the front. As you look at the design, the door is set back to almost where the current door is now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The standing seam metal roof encompasses the entire patio, so it's a covered space. We would even have the opportunity to, put any kind of that, like they have at Local, that plastic stuff, if we needed, some additional seasonal protection. But the current concept doesn't include that. But there'll be more landscaping and greenery in that space. So it'll essentially be almost enclosed.
But sound would be sort of angled either toward 9 Mile or toward
Correct,
the courthouse.
Yeah. And because we've extended the building and it's 18 feet tall, all sound is going to bounce out towards you.
That's fine. That's great.
Well, I have a follow-up question on that, if I may.
Sure.
I think we have in our sound ordinance that if you have an outdoor patio, that you have to meet the sound ordinance requirements with your speakers.
Right.
I don't know if that has been applied to the site plan application.
Well, it would be when they turn their speakers on, I would
Yeah, the ordinance applies. It's For outdoor use or any other use the ordinance applies to, it's just a constant. It doesn't have to be included or evaluated to site plan. They're just responsible to adhere to it at all times.
Okay.
So they would be subject to that.
Part of the code of
Right.
ordinances, not our zoning.
Well, I know it points to 9 Mile, but there's a parking lot across them, and it's the police parking lot almost, and so that would hit the neighbors on the other side. And so I just want to make sure on East Troy.
Yeah, all
I just want to
applicable.
make sure that, you know, as more restaurants come down, and I just want to make sure that the residents, we're not impacting the residents negatively.
Well, understood.
And that's our goal,
Troy
too.
investor
We want
already
to
get
get
impacted. I mean, yeah, you already live in the middle of it.
All applicable ordinance would apply to them related to sound ordinance. So if it's there, if it's adopted, and they exceed it, they would be subject to violation of that.
And it looks like you've got sort of your coolers, your kitchen, and some of your service areas toward the alley. So would deliveries be coming and going?
All
out of the
deliveries
alley
will come through the alley. We've got a kitchen door that they'll come right through directly into the kitchen. And all beer deliveries will come in through that addition that we've added for the beer coolers. So it'll be a direct access right in.
What time of day do those happen? Approximately. Early in the morning, throughout the day, late in the evening?
Realistically, 9 to 5.
Okay. All right, so not 7 a.m.
No.
Okay.
Occasionally, well, this restaurant is not open until 3 o'clock, so we're not a breakfast place. So no deliveries will show up at 7 a.m. because there will be nobody there.
But potentially in the future, you could expand and do lunch or breakfast. It wouldn't be
We
tied.
will never do breakfast. I solemnly swear.
We already have great breakfast places
Yes.
in Ferndale. Why would you want to do breakfast? And my only other question, and I'm not sure if this one's for you or if it's for Michelle, is regarding the windows. And then there was a note about as part of the appearance review process, there was some conversation about a wall that needed to be sort of broken up with some different elevations. Is that the same wall?
Yes.
Okay. So the solution that the appearance review process came up with was to do some of the plantings and other things to make up for some of the windows that have come out.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood that it was the same wall.
And then we also talked about, so on their plan, I don't know if it was changed in the edition that you got, but what they took to appearance review is basically the same brick or the same color brick, I guess. And then, so what we talked about to provide architectural variety was that they could use the different bricks within those, like he said,
Filled in the window.
to fill in the window, so.
Yeah,
That provided a
that
little bit
was
of
my
variety,
guess.
and the review committee was.
I trust they'll find something fantastic, and that appearance review probably went closely over it with you guys and the city. So. Okay.
I just want to remind everybody too, and this isn't, Tom will probably, but always remember too that the approval is not necessarily subject to just this user. The building could be sold at a later date, and operational models do change. So if there are concerns and there's site plan design issues that would be related to potential expansions of operation, now would be a good time to talk about them as well. So
if they're changing brick types or elevations, that's more than just a planting that could die or get pulled out by the next.
That was more in relation to the pickup and drop, condition on hours or hours of pickup and drop off, those type of things in case operation expansions, not through these guys or someone else were to expand in the future.
Right. Well, I'm just thinking too, in terms of, and forgive me if I didn't get a chance to run over before the meeting, but so on the alley that exists, so obviously there's a wall along and then on the other side, that's immediately abutting the homes, is there a continuous wall / garage along their side as well? Because I'm just looking at the plans and working in a restaurant, I think the alleys becomes employee smoking area, it becomes employee cell phone break area, so there's, there'll be activity in the alley. So I just want to make sure that the residents who are back there, they have a protection.
I mean, based on the layout of the space, we've got various options to send employees on outside breaks to our property, near kind of back by the dumpster area along the wall. We could send them out to the other, side. But in the alley, there is garages, fencing, trees, piles of trash.
I just want to make sure that there was a solid wall on the right.
I do not believe there is a solid screening wall on that side.
That's my question.
Yeah,
No, it's not. It's broken up, but each person
Yeah,
has their own
it's-
fencing
it's
or
well-
garages.
It's well separated from the homes, but by garages and fences and trees and those type of things, but there's not a continuous wall along that side of the property. No.
Garage front.
Yeah, I mean, I see the garage front, and I see there's like a solid wall there, and it looks like, but I can't tell what's going on in this very last house.
There's
That's
like,
open.
It looks like it's wide open, which is
The
kind
one
of the
on
main
Leland?
door right off the kitchen,
Yeah.
which to me, I think, in the summer, they prop the kitchen door open because it gets really hot in the kitchen. I mean, that's kind of a common.
We won't, because we have, our, opening the kitchen door would not be applicable in our situation based on the design. It would change the hood effectiveness, and it changed the AC. The building is going to be, very well air-conditioned and controlled.
I guess I would just ask, as an I don't think this needs to be a special or a condition of approval, but that, be very aware of your neighbors at that, especially at this main
Well, most definitely.
door, because it is immediately backing up to someone's backyard with no screening really whatsoever of that. And
We
that's the
promise
main.
we'll hire non-smokers.
You're gonna hire wait staff and a kitchen staff.
Yeah,
That
kitchen
doesn't
staff.
Smoke, I'm
yeah,
buying
good
that.
luck.
We joke about that all the time. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, we need non-smokers.
Yeah. Going off of the discussion about the wall along Leland, I guess maybe I don't know if you or the architect can talk about why you didn't choose to include any windows along that wall. I know, looking at the site plan, obviously during the kitchen, there's certain
Well, there may be
restrictions,
one
but-
window added to the kitchen for the sanity of our kitchen staff. But the other area, the front corner of the building is kind of our living room, fireplace, library room, so windows really didn't make sense there. And that would be probably 15, 20 feet off the corner there where the existing angled wall is. We're squaring it off. That's where there'll be a fireplace. Immediately behind that is the wine cellar and beer cooler, and then there's the bathrooms. So, and then the kitchen. So that whole wall became kind of more function as opposed to design or, patron-based.
Right. I just didn't know if there's any opportunity as part of, I don't know, building code, if you can have windows, I don't know, obviously not in a toilet, but above the sinks or above the stairs that you have going upstairs. I know from the city's perspective, we try not to, we try to encourage living walls, and obviously you've done that on other parts of the site, but really essentially have kind of turned your back towards Leland. And so anything we could do to not make that a dead space of just a long wall.
Well, I don't know that we've necessarily turned our back towards Leland. I think that we're very amenable to including additional trees or landscaping. We've talked about the offset, different architectural pieces. To put glass outside of the front site is difficult based on the design. I'd be happy to put glass in the kitchen area, in the prep area, but I don't know that if that's something you'd like to see, we could work on that, and we've already talked about wanting to do that. On the upper level, if we needed to include a couple of windows or do some offset architectural on the side there, I'm not opposed to that either. We just didn't find it to be necessary, and windows are an expense, so that's why we thought we would include the glass along the front and down the side. The entire patio wall, the entire second story on that standing seam roof is all glass. The whole front entrance is glass. So consider the considerable glass percentage is increasing probably by 40-50% compared to what it is today. So that's kind of how we looked at it from our perspective. But if you have a suggestion on Leland, we'd be happy to look at what we could do.
I concur with our chair. Your property is on a corner, and we are all about improving our pedestrian experience as we look to reinvest on the rest of East 9 Mile and build up. So you are in a prime location, and I appreciate what you've done with your front of the building. It looks beautiful. But yeah, if we can focus on looking at how to break up the big blank wall as the neighbors and people are coming around, I think that would be advantageous, more than just, your arbor trees and things like that. So.
Oh, we agree, and we had no intentions of making it a blank wall and just being one color straight down. Like I said, where every current window is now would be offset with, filled in with the opposite block, like we have with the theme going around the building. So it has that kind of window.
I'd appreciate that, and I trust. I think your architect has done a great job looking at the other elevations. I just think looking at this east elevation here, knowing I said that obviously there's a parking lot across the street right now, but I think we all hope that someday there won't be a parking lot on that corner, and so. Anything you can do, even as you mentioned, that the mezzanine area, it looks like there's opportunity for windows there. So that even below that, I don't know if the stairs kind of preempt, but any place you can fit it, the prep kitchen, if there's opportunities to put some.
Yeah, I mean, we're completely amenable to that. So, if we can work together to come up with a plan that makes sense and looks better.
Yes, I think that would be something I would be supportive of.
Through the chair, if I may. I have a question regarding that Leland, not to beat up that side a lot, but I used to live up that way. And as far as I'm looking at the plan and the lighting scheme, there's no lighting along that wall. Was there an intent behind that, or is there a reason behind that? It just seems like as you walk down that way, at night especially, it's kind of dark and it's forgotten about.
I'm going to say on the plans, if you're not seeing lighting, it's an oversight.
Okay.
We plan on lighting the whole corner there. We've yet to determine our signage. That's an important corner coming from the east for us, too, from a business perspective. We're not trying. I have no intention to make that the dead wall and make it, either dark or otherwise. So.
Yeah, I think the lighting could possibly break it up and add to architectural features.
I think it's a great comment.
Just out of curiosity, because I wasn't at the appearance review, I know a green element where the windows used to be was talked about. I know your guys' propensity to include art in projects.
Well, there's also going to be a mural on that wall, too. I don't know if that's been
on Leland?
Yes.
Oh.
We have part of our concept is to kind of emulate the 1920s kind of murals that existed in New York or some of the bigger cities, or Philadelphia, where we do kind of a street art that kind of emulates the theme of the restaurant without being a sign. So it was like the whole concept that we have. You're not going to see black owls anywhere. You're not going to. It's going to be a lot more demure. We're not looking to have signage all over the place and eat here. It's more of a kind of a classic, timeless place that we want to live on, for 100 years. Is the concept. So we plan on having art down that wall too. So that's kind of one thing that we've not talked about.
Right. Well, I think that's not really reflected on the plans that we've seen. I see in the plans you've submitted, you've put a lot of attention detail to the wall that faces your parking lot.
I apologize because we talked at length at the appearance committee about that, and I thought that maybe would have been in your packet, so I apologize if that was
So I guess if there's anything you can do, and Derek just mentioned, so obviously you're doing this living wall and this, art facing the outdoor patio in your parking lot. If you can kind of replicate that to a lesser degree facing Leland.
That was the general idea, because we wanted folks coming off of 75 and from the east to see that as well. So it kind of wrapped around for the whole package.
Okay. Yeah, Michelle?
And I apologize. We have talked about that mural on that wall, and it wasn't included, I guess, in the plan because we hadn't seen any of their drawings yet for that, but murals are allowed, one per building, and so we were definitely working.
Yeah, like I said, I apologize. I thought you had that in here.
So I would just maybe suggest, maybe in the motion, whoever makes it to, make sure that we say enhance the Leland facade through a combination of lighting, windows, art, or something along those lines to enhance that.
Yeah, we'd be happy to work with you on that. I think you'll like what we have in mind.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Any, I guess, more discussion on the Leland wall or architecture while we're on this subject before we go to?
What type of agreement is your organization going to have with this court on allowing to use their brand-new redone wall to adhere and manage and maintain your art on another building owned by the city?
Well, I think I can answer that, and I'll let Tom speak to it as well. We've had several discussions with the court and the judge, and then obviously this project has taken some time, and the judge was under the weather for a little while. The court has been extraordinarily excited about partnering with something on that wall compared to what was there before. The color that it's been painted now has been approved by the court, and it was in preparation for what would be installed all there. There has been, even to the extent Shea Parker's, what that agreement will look like, I don't know yet. We haven't written it up yet. We wanted to come to the Planning Commission first and make sure there was no significant changes here. And then that'll go forward. If the project is going forward, we'll have the city attorney and those guys draft up some type of agreement on what the maintenance agreement looks like, if that's what your question is. But those details will be worked out after we know exactly what it is going to be installed.
Yeah, we have that in our packets.
You guys have
Yeah,
it?
we have that one, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so this was the general concept. So there'll be kind of raised wire screening, if you will, that'll be offset off the building.
How far does that project, you know, roughly?
It's like 4 inches or something. It's all set into the ground, and then it cascades and grows up the side. You know, we'll obviously be watering it and manicuring it. We have no interest in that dying.
Is that curbed off? I guess, how do we prevent cars from pulling?
Oh, because there'll be the parking blocks in front.
There are blocks in front?
Yeah, there will be.
I'm seeing someone shaking their head no.
And this kind of shows the offset
There's,
picture.
no, so there's a I'm sorry. So it's curbed. Okay, thanks.
Did we curb that one?
It used to be box that's curved now with landscape.
Oh, talking about parking lot.
Will be. It's blocks now, and it will be curbed.
I just want to make sure there was something in place to ensure that that's not damaged.
Yes, it has to be one or the other for sure. Tom, are you guys gonna harvest those? The hops? I know we've talked about that. Is that something you guys are going to utilize or someone's going to utilize?
I mean, maybe, but
I'm just curious.
We have no intention to brew beer. If hops are a harvest of hops could augment something else in the future, maybe. It's more for appearance, and it's more for the kind of Michigan, you know, kind of heritage. The hops that we plan on using are all from the 1700s, brought over by some of the original settlers of Michigan, and they've really gone well, and they've grown wild in the northern Michigan woods. So they can handle the winter. They're cool. So a lot of the brewers are now harvesting those and using them. Cascade hops and some other things that are grown in northern Michigan. Shorts has done a pretty great job with that. So that was kind of the impetus for that.
Okay. Any other architectural questions? Maybe we can touch on parking. Obviously, that's always a hot button kind of issue. This is kind of leaning on one of the more well-parked facilities. But in our downtown, we don't want to see, lots of parking lots. We try to discourage that. But obviously, as mentioned, we do have an ordinance that says you can't take away any existing spaces. So I understand you're accomplishing that through a 5-year lease with a credit union. From a city perspective, do we have, I guess, does that accomplish the ordinance requirements? Because there's no guarantee that, like I said, if that parking lot will always be there. And
in staff's opinion, yes, but ultimately the ultimate arbiter of that is you guys in discussion.
Us or city council?
You guys. This doesn't go to city council. This is a permitted use. So the amount that the payment in lieu is established by council. Right. But whether or not the shared parking agreement and the additional 30 spaces they're providing offset significantly enough the loss is ultimately a site plan approval issue, and whether that payment in lieu is going to be required or not.
Okay, I thought the payment in lieu had to have been by the city council.
I think that, I'll go back and double check, but I think the amount of the payment in spaces has to be established by council.
Council may approve, deny, or approve in part an application to provide payment in lieu of off-street parking. So is there an option to not
Yeah, what we're saying is, even though the ordinance isn't specific about the addition of the shared parking and a shared parking agreement is allowed to meet the parking standards of the ordinance. They're removing 4, and I believe there's 20-some spaces in the shared agreement. So 36 in actuality, when you include the shared agreement. Now, it's not in perpetuity, and we understand that, but they haven't lost any. In fact, they've added 32 spaces by ordinance, so there's no reason for it to go to council. What staff's recommendation is there's no reason to go to council for the payment in lieu discussion. There's not any net loss of spaces, at least over the next 5 years. And that's where the ordinance isn't specific. Is it because it's only 5 years? Is it really a net loss? I would like to point out, too, is in relation to the parking, we worked a considerable amount of time with them on the parking lot. There is a design for the parking lot, and by reducing the sidewalks and some other things, that would facilitate them not losing maybe one space, which would greatly lessen the burden of any payment in lieu. but it's a much less desirable parking lot from a design standpoint, both for pedestrian use, bicycle racks,
Greenery.
Ingress, egress, landscaping on the interior. So we've pushed and staff and asked them to go with this design, which actually technically lessens the number of spaces on the site and augment it with the parking agreement, as opposed to trying to jam as many spaces on the site as they can to avoid the payment in lieu. That, in part, goes along with our recommendation because we've kind of fallen into that interpretation section of the ordinance where, you know, it doesn't clearly state how long that agreement has to be for it to count as augmentation or replacement of lost spaces. So we are recommending that they not be required to pay in lieu, and that the 5 years of the agreement under the current situation is enough, especially with the surrounding parking available from public parking lots as well, that it goes and it certainly meets or exceeds the intent of the ordinances as far as providing off-street parking. So that is our recommendation.
Okay. Now, is the shared parking just for the lot on the north side 9 Mile, or does it extend into the credit union property on the south side 9 Mile as well?
No, it's on the north side. It's 36 spots. We basically now operate that parking lot going forward. So we'll be using that exclusively for our hours of operation.
Okay. How many employees do you anticipate at your peak Saturday shift? Or
30-ish. That may be a little high, you know, maybe 20. Well, on a per shift basis, I mean, we'll probably have 45, 50 employees total. We'll probably have 6, 8, 10 guys, kitchen back of the house, and then in front of the house, probably about 10, 20, so, you know, 30 max on the most, you know, crazy night. But the idea was for us to move our employees to our parking, keep them off the streets, and to still allow for our other lot, which we have along the courthouse wall, for our customers.
That was my question. So you're going to direct all your employees to park in this extra lot?
Yeah, that was the whole impetus to really get this extra parking.
Just as a point, 10.03K4 states that the use of any money collected in lieu would be used for the specific purpose they're requiring, to lease off-street parking facilities. So I think they kind of accomplished that when we look into it. And the amount of collection for 4 spaces is nearly $20,000, and I think if we can get 5 years out of it, clearly established a better result.
I'd like to throw out a suggestion for the commissioners to entertain. I noticed the bike rack. How many bikes are on that bike rack? Fit on that bike rack?
I believe it's 8 or 10.
8 or 10. It's interesting that it's in the back of the parking lot near the dumpster, and I'm not sure how many bicyclists will actually park through your actual parking lot to go park there. Particularly, you're putting cyclists near a dumpster, which is a interesting.
What's the back of it?
I know it's the back of it, but
Dumpster's enclosed by a brick wall with a fence.
okay.
Right. So you're seeing a brick wall.
Okay,
6
you're
foot
seeing
wall.
a brick wall.
Yeah, it's
I'm
probably the
thinking about
most
this-
secure spot. There's no one can come in from the alley. It's, you know, that's why we chose that spot.
I understand what you're saying. that
You're
bicyclists-
thinking it should be more on the road? Is that
Right,
what
they
you're
don't like to
talking?
traverse parking lots. But I'm not sure if there's another spot that we can.
Well, perhaps we could ask them to put in another one as part of in lieu of parking. I know there's bicycle parking in the city hall across the street. I just think that your restaurant in high peak season is going to attract a ton of cyclists, more than the 10 that you are providing. And I know we have bike parking everywhere, but they're always full.
Sure.
So I just think.
Would you be amenable to having it maybe closer or along any city property?
Well, I guess my thought would be, I don't know what your lease allows you to do, but if you put a bike rack on the
other lot?
On the other lot.
That would be, yes, I think
we
that
could
would
do
be
that all day
great.
long.
Yeah.
Something of the same design, so it's not like an add-on, but maybe addition over on that side. So employees could maybe, you know, if you have
Of course.
bicycling
I'd be
employees.
happy to do that.
In addition to, right. Does that work for you?
I think that does. I just know it won't be enough.
Was there any discussion, and I know this was a completely impervious site beforehand, but about stormwater and the enhancements we could do as part of this? I mean,
Well, we
obviously, there's
did.
not much area. I don't know if
No,
there was
we
any
did.
discussion about the island. We know we talked about this with our last development.
Yeah, there's a slight improvement with the impervious surface added to the island. Yeah, this site's 100% pervious. We did check with the city attorney. I mean, obviously, the city's system is designed to handle it as is. They are making, you know, significant improvements to the site. Anywhere we did stormwater, it's not an instance where we have a scrape site where there's a possibility of going underground and enhancing the, you know, doing an engineering fix underground. So we've looked at it, and we think it's the most that can be done with the site right now. There has been some discussion, and if we could fit some more in without losing parking or some other things, we had talked about it, but there's really very little space to do any additional impervious.
And do I read these plans correctly? In the island, in the middle where the light pole is there like a paved area there for crossing, essentially?
There's a little barrier-free paving area.
Yeah, so people can
Concrete
park
crossing.
against the living wall, could potentially walk
Yes.
through,
Across the island, you're talking
across the
about?
island.
Yeah, sure.
That there would be.
A little
pavement.
sidewalk, sure.
Yeah, concrete crosswalk with a light pole right in the middle, but.
I don't recall if it's in the middle or not.
Yeah.
Looks like it.
Yes, there's a concrete walkway through the middle with a light pole directly in the middle.
Maybe we could put the light pole not directly in the middle of the walkway? Just a thought.
Well, it's significantly wide enough on either side of it.
Is it?
Yeah, but we could look to move.
Yeah, I think it's like 6 feet or something, or 7 feet.
Big.
Yeah.
It's 18. If
It's
this is
18.
if this is to scale, that's an 18
Yeah.
foot.
The
or
whole
9
concrete
foot.
area is almost approximately
If that's a
9
9-foot
to
parking
10 foot
space,
wide,
yeah.
and then the pole, so you'll have 5 or 6 feet on either side of it. Pole's only about a foot round base. But yeah, we can move it, certainly, we could be moved.
Just in general, not putting
Yeah.
objects in the middle of pathways.
Understood.
Yeah.
I do.
Good idea.
The opposite of barrier-free.
Other thoughts, questions, comments on the plan? Any topic?
I've got one. The screening wall, can you, with the back alley, the public alley, can you discuss that? So you're going to leave what's there for part of it and then knock down and add entrance as well for the gate, correct? Is
For the
that-
gate, for the dumpster?
Yeah.
Yes.
So right now it's a full wall.
Full wall.
That's there now. So
Building to building.
Gotcha. So you're
So
keeping
there'll be a gate as opposed to the brick wall.
the rest stays. That's the only
Correct, the
spot.
rest stays. And I believe that's a 6-foot wall.
And are you painting it too?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do something that, we're not gonna leave it
Kind of part of my
white brick.
Pretty ugly. That'd be great if you could.
It's looking a little dingy.
Yeah, most definitely. We hadn't decided on the paint color or what we do with it, but
That's all I got.
All right, any other questions, comments? Otherwise, I guess we can entertain a motion. If I could find it.
Absolutely, and I will add in the extra condition that we discussed, but would be happy for a friendly amendment if it is not in line with all of our thinking. I would move that in the matter of 345 East 9 Mile Road, the Black Owl Restaurant, that the Planning Commission approve the site plans based on the plans received and dated by the Planning Department on October 9th, 2014, with the following findings and subject to the following conditions. Finding number 1. The site plan and supporting documents demonstrate that all applicable requirements of the zoning ordinance, as well as other city ordinances, standards, and requirements can be met subject to the conditions noted. Finding number 2, shared off-street parking areas have been designed to avoid common traffic problems and promote safety. Number 3, the proposed improvements should have a satisfactory and harmonious relationship with the development on site, as well as existing development in the adjacent vicinity. Number 4, the proposed development will not have an unreasonably detrimental or injurious effect upon the natural characteristics and features of the site or those of the surrounding area. Number 5, the architectural compatibility and design components have been found to meet the standards as approved by the Appearance Review Committee. and with the following conditions. Number 1, that a note be added to the plan indicating that all rooftop mechanical equipment shall be screened. You guys have pressed that. That a note be added to the plan prior to final approval by staff, indicating that all landscape material will be kept in good condition and that any dead or damaged material will be replaced in a manner consistent with the approved plans and at the responsibility of the property owner. Number 3, that irrigation plans are submitted prior to final site plan approval by staff. Number 4, that all final engineering details and plans be reviewed and approved by the city's engineering consultant prior to the issuance of a building permit by the staff. Condition number 5, the lighting plan is revised and resubmitted demonstrating compliance with the requirements of the city's Environmental Performance Standards Ordinance prior to the final site plan approval by staff. Number 6, that the east elevation is adjusted to provide for architectural variety. To meet the conditions of the Appearance Review Committee, which could include enhancing lighting, enhancing the frontage with lighting, art, landscaping, or windows prior to final site plan approval by staff. And that we add number 7, that a grease trap be added and approved by staff.
And the bicycle.
Would you like to add an amendment?
Well, we don't have a second yet, so you still have the motion. You're still making the motion technically, so.
I don't remember what the bicycle one was.
To add a bike rack on the
credit union one side?
Correct.
At a minimum.
At a minimum.
That the applicant will work with staff to locate additional bicycle parking. Credit union one?
In the credit union one site and any other appropriate location.
In the leased credit union one site or in any other appropriate location.
Okay. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Yeah, support by, or a second by Commissioner Piana. All right, discussion on the motion. Okay. I think we addressed the staff concerns about the grease traps.
And with the east elevation, I tried to make it very broad. It sounds like the applicant has a lot of exciting ideas that they have already worked with the DDA and with staff on.
Yeah, I feel comfortable with staff and applicant working together. I think they've heard our comments and know the intent that we're.
Some of the same ideas.
Well, and I can say from a staff point of view, they've always far any request we've made in relation to the site plan, they've come back and exceeded the requests we've made. So I certainly expect the same type of reaction to this as well.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or discussion on the motion? Otherwise, we can do a voice vote. All those in favor, say aye. 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 Opposed? Welcome to the city of Ferndale after 3 short years. And I appreciate the restaurants coming this side of Woodward. That's greatly appreciated. I'll be riding my bike and taking up 3 of those spaces.
Good.
So.
You're not doing lunch?
Not out of the gates.
Oh, you're going to heartbreak an entire Credit Union 1 and City Hall staff, almost immediately.
What's your anticipated, if everything goes smoothly, you're hoping to open next year?
We would love to be open by May, June next year. But we'll see. Next summer.
We look forward to hearing about your grand opening. So.
We will definitely, there'll be lots of notice.
And thank you for your diligence to design.
Thank you.
It's a high-quality design building.
Oh. We appreciate that.
Clearly a labor of love.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, such a labor of love, you can tell.
Yes, thank you guys very much for your patience.
Thank you. All right, with that, we have old business, nothing on the agenda this evening. Call the audience. Anyone here to speak about anything else? Seeing none, we go to administrative items. Mr. Delacorte? Any administrative
Where did we
items?
stick these 2 things?
They're down for the commission discussion items.
No.
Okay. Which brings us to commission and discussion items. The first one, a very hot topic of our use variance amendment. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
hot topic's the next one.
This is one we've probably barely talked about at all in the past. The city zoning ordinance and some other zoning ordinance in municipalities have done this and others don't. And I'll try to be as brief as possible. When you go to a city, there's usually potentially two types of variances an applicant can request. if they believe they either have a hardship or a unique circumstance within the community. One is a dimensional variance that deals with variances from exactly what it sounds like, dimensional requirements, from a side yard setback, area coverage, height, number of parking spaces, width, length, anything that deals with an actual measured number. And that is allowed in the city, and any applicant who feels like they need to ask for one of those is able to ask for those. The second one is a use variance, which is a different animal that allows an applicant to ask for a variance to allow a use in a zoning district that normally would not be allowed. And I will use a real-world example on how this came up. There's two in the city, but the most recent one is the St. James School in the C2 district. Yes, and this is where it came up, and there was one other one previously, and in talking with the city attorney, this was a specific instance where, if available, it would have been the course of action that staff most likely would have recommended related to the situation, because it wouldn't have required the rezoning of the whole property from retail or C2 to single-family or multiple-family residential for what appeared to be a very site-specific and use-specific reason. The church had, and for those of you who aren't familiar with it or hadn't heard the discussion on it, I think most everybody had some existing buildings on the site. They were not proposing to expand, alter, create a new site plan, add any parking, subtract any parking. They were doing very little with the site that had to do with an expansion or conversion of use, but based on solid zoning practice, the city had rezoned the property to G2 or C2 general commercial, which created nonconformance on the site, both with the place of worship and for the use of the exterior or accessory buildings on the site for a senior-assisted living facility. In several instances, that would have been one where, as opposed to rezoning the property, as opposed to going through a full PUD process or using some other process, the city has the ability to allow that to be evaluated by the the Board of Zoning Appeals prior to going through that process. It doesn't mean they have to approve it. It doesn't mean they have to agree that with staff or with the applicant that it's a good opportunity. But based on our ordinance prohibits us from even asking. And we think that is a tool or an opportunity that there really isn't a reason to prohibit the ask. We have a qualified Board of Zoning Appeals. There's standards and criteria in place for that request to be, heard under. They have to meet the same criteria as any other variance and any other criteria that's put in place. All our ordinance does is prevent them from making the ask. And allowing the Zoning Board of Appeals to do their job and review that request and make a determination if that instance that is appropriate. Oftentimes, boards of zoning appeals refer those back to the Planning Commission for review and recommendation before making a determination. It also, unlike a rezoning, allows specific criteria to be attached to that rezoning, whether it be a site plan, anything else. It allows the full breadth of the variance approval. It also carries the weight of the criteria that go along with a variance, including the applicant has to demonstrate it creates a hardship, they're denied a substantial justice, that others similar. So, I mean, there's a mechanism in place to make sure it's only used in the most unique of circumstances. I mean, I've been doing this, and Sarah can speak to it as well. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've only recommended 2 in the entire history of my career. But there are specific instances where it may be the most appropriate tool, and we've just eliminated the possibility of ever considering it. The other one is a situation like FLAX down on Livernois, where, again, you have an existing nonconforming situation where a use variance tied to a very specific legal agreement for only that specific use and not rezoning the property from mixed use to industrial may be an appropriate course of action. I'm not saying it is, and I'm not arguing that in each instance the Zoning Board of Appeals should or should not agree with the variance. But from a staff's point of view, I'm not sure why we've eliminated the tool or the ability to make the ask. The only thing we've done is taking a possible mechanism that applies to appropriate situation away and not allowed it to be used if that situation arises. So our recommendation, and we've prepared a draft amendment for discussion here. It's not here to be voted on. It's just here for discussion, is that the Planning Commission consider it and that we may bring it forward for consideration and a hearing for a zoning amendment at some point in the future, but we wanted to hear the Planning Commission's opinion first.
Okay. Thank you for that. Does anyone want to start off with initial thoughts or comments on it?
I think I missed why it's not in the ordinance now. Oversight?
I'm not, no, there specifically prohibits use variances. I mean, it clearly wasn't oversight. It was done for an intention.
It wasn't done intentionally.
Oftentimes it's, go
Remind me
ahead.
why it's, I can't remember, and true, when the use variance law came, or when this came out, I remember when all the communities were looking to amend their ordinances.
That was conditional rezoning. Use variance has always been legal.
I'm thinking conditional rezoning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Use variance has always been allowed. Some communities do it, and
No, I know that there's, maybe townships can't.
well,
There's
that I don't know
township
about.
laws. I think some
Yeah.
townships are, if you haven't approved a use variance before a certain time, you're prohibited from doing it, I believe.
Yeah, that I'm not aware of. I've never been, I have been, or dealt with a couple of communities that have prohibited them. Usually it arises, and I'll be very honest in the discussion part of it, from a renegade BZA or zoning board of appeals that uses the use variance tool to sidestep the zoning ordinance, where they say, we don't care what the Planning Commission says, and Joe comes in and he wants to use his property for something other than the zoning ordinance allows, and they go ahead and grants the variance, which allows them to sidestep the ordinance. I don't think that's the situation here, and I don't think that's why the prohibition was put in here. Well, maybe it was at one
I
time.
don't think that it wasn't ever.
Yeah, possibly.
I know personally, I think
Ever.
when we talked about use variances in the past, I have very mixed feelings on them. I kind of think that they are essentially a rezoning, and that the ZBA gets to do, that doesn't go to council, doesn't go to planning commission. It kind of gives them that authority to, quote unquote, kind of rezone a property. Granted, there's conditions, but so is a conditional rezoning. I almost think a conditional rezoning is a better way to go about the same outcome without having to go through the BZA.
Yeah, like I said, in the rarest of instances, should the use variance be used? Yes, I agree.
I think what the applicant had, if I remember correctly, in the case on Woodward was that a conditional rezoning, in their perception, would somehow hamper their financing capacity. Is this something similar? I mean, I don't see how this would be any different, actually.
I wouldn't.
In my opinion.
I'm not evaluating the validity of that argument, but how different is this from what we could have offered them in a conditional rezoning? It seems very similar. It's tied either to their use.
I think the use variance, I think that they have to prove a necessary hardship, which I'm not sure the church could have proven, that they couldn't have usually used that property for the.
And again, I'm not saying they could or couldn't. All I'm saying is that we would have preferred they start with that and then make that argument, and if the ZBA denied it, then move on to rezoning. We're not sure that there's any reason not to have them or not allow them to make that argument in certain circumstances. We're not here saying there's the validity to their request, but we think it's a tool that could have been utilized in that instance instead of rezoning. Conditional or not, you're still rezoning the underlying property. You still move it from, a use variance you don't. Once that applicant goes away, you can condition it that if that applicant ceases use, that variance stops on that day, and then the property goes back to being zoned and the way it should be.
How is that different from a conditional rezoning?
The conditional zoning has to be offered by the applicant.
And it changes the zoning district.
Right, and it's conditional rezoning, so.
But it would have the same.
That's zone.
No.
Is it?
No, hold on, we're talking about three very different things. The difference between a use variance and a conditional rezoning, the property stays zoned general commercial. So if the applicant goes away, it doesn't have to revert back. There's no legal process to rezone it back to general commercial.
Okay.
A use variance, once that applicant is done, if the church goes away and the site is raised, it's zoned general commercial. There's no follow-up necessary. A conditional rezoning changes the property, all the property, from general commercial to R4. So then either the applicant has to want to rezone it back, you have to follow through, and there has to be a paper trail 10 years or 15 years from now that the city goes back and does it, or there has to be a reverter built back into it that someone finds. The zoning map is changed with a rezoning. With a use variance, it is not. And that is the biggest difference, and we think in some instances, very rare, that might be the more appropriate course of action, or at least the ability to ask for it shouldn't be summarily eliminated from the ordinance. The ability to ask for it is only tying our own hands.
I don't know that I agree with that.
I mean, that's all this does is eliminate anybody from asking it. It doesn't approve it.
I don't think the ZBA is the right body to be looking at it.
And a variance, yes. At a rezoning, no.
Well, a use variance is essentially a rezoning, in my opinion. I mean,
You don't change the underlying
I
zoning of the
understand,
property.
but
Yeah, that's
for intentional, all intents and purposes, it changes the use that's permitted on the property.
only one. It may only add one. It doesn't change the full range of them like a rezoning.
I understand.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know. It is a basic difference. It does,
What's the cost difference? It's got to be minimal, right, for application?
it's nominal or it's insignificant.
Sorry, Commissioner Farr, you had something to add?
What are the extinguishing or circumstances which it would extinguish a use variance?
What do you mean it would extinguish?
If I get granted a use variance for my property at the church, can I pass that use variance? I mean, are there any delineated out? What's your ideas on that? I mean, if I get granted a use variance, and I mean, what you said was if the property's raised, then the use variance goes away.
It can or can't. It can be defined by the conditions of the variance.
Okay.
So you could potentially transfer it to another party.
Right, you can
You
transfer
could.
of ownership.
If you tied it to ownership, then it would extinguish upon ownership. If you tied it to the use, then it would extinguish upon a change in use. It's just a tool we don't have.
I feel like it's really subjective that this, you're now, rather than the process that we just went through about the fit or not of a zoning district in a specific area, this is, do I like you in your project or not?
Oh, it's actually a higher standard for a use variance than it is a rezoning,
Right.
a much higher standard.
The unnecessary hardship criteria, like I said, is considered one of the hardest things to prove. But again, I think the examples you gave, whether or not those are appropriate or not, I think, I don't know if they would have necessarily proven the hardship to me if I was on the ZBA. But again, I think the ZBA, just in my opinion, generally has, I like them doing dimensional hardships. I think use variances get into rezoning and more master plan type issues that I think council should look at. And
I would suggest that dimensional requirements are just as important as use requirements. We have a code that basically says we prefer form over function, that puts an emphasis on dimensional. Dimensional are more common, so therefore they're more readily accepted. But it is the exact same thing. Whether they grant a variance from a setback or to allow a use that's allowed in another district, really one isn't more important than the other. They should have the opportunity to make the ask in either circumstance, is my argument. Not that it should be granted or not granted, but there's no reason to eliminate the tool. You can already ask for a dimensional variance. I can ask to put my building 5 foot closer to the property line under a unique circumstance. There are unique circumstances that arise that may justify an ask to put a senior assisted living in a G2 piece of property. Neither one is more or less a bastardization of the zoning ordinance. They're both variances. It's a tool that's acceptable in both practices. And if you have a BZA that operates under the rules, they're very similar. I'm not. It's just a tool we've taken away from ourselves.
What happens in the process if the BZA approves it?
it then comes to us for site plan?
Yeah, site plan approvals are all the same. And I mean, it's anything else it remains exactly the same thing if they grant a dimensional variance.
Use variances could have conditions tied to it that would be out of our hands. That we
The
could-
BZA can make the conditions
Mhm.
and then be out of our hands when it comes to us.
Out of your hands, I don't understand what that means.
As part of the use variance, if they made some conditions about, like you said, operational, that it ends with the use, if it ends with the property owner, if there's hours of operation limits, any conditions that they would put to the use variance would be tied to that property that we couldn't adjust.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be dimensional related, those type of things that are under the purview of the Planning Commission. Operational, like hours of operation, may cross over into something that's discretionary by your board as well. But mostly, they should stay away from parking and screening and those type of things. That's really not something that they get
The use is
into.
only appropriate if it's heavily screened. The use is only appropriate if it's set back 50 feet from the property.
I understand, and those are all possibilities. Like I said, in any instance we've ever done them, and I can only speak for myself, we've always recommended that they go to the Planning Commission first, and talk to the Planning Commission first, and that recommendation to go for the use variance come from the Planning Commission, not go directly there. Now, that doesn't mean that this wouldn't grant them the right to go directly there and ask, but I've never seen one approved where the BZA didn't and a staff didn't recommend that it be kicked to the Planning Commission for evaluation first under that circumstance. But ultimately, yes, if you put the tool back in place, they can make the ask, And the zoning board of appeals will be put in a position to do the right thing based on the criteria there, the same they are as a dimensional variance. They can tie dimensional requirements to condition as well. Use variances are different animals, I grant you that, but it's the same process and the same tool, and we brought it forward just because it was discussed in a couple of instances where, what if we would have liked to do this? What if we did feel as staff this was the most appropriate tool? We at least wanted the opportunity to bring it forward and discuss it, and not have it be a blanket prohibition and not even be able to discuss it with an applicant or with the planning commission or ZBA. That's really all we're saying. We're not waiting any individual. I used one as an example. We may have brought it forward and recommended approval that it go that direction. Doesn't mean anybody has to agree with us, just like anything else we bring forward. What we were concerned with was the inability to even suggest it as a process. And why would we want a blanket prohibition on it like that? Obviously, each one can be weighted on its own merit, but we think they should have the opportunity to make the ask and be weighted or be considered.
Thoughts?
I don't know enough about it, but are we unique for some reason in having one or not having use variance? I don't usually ask to know what other communities are doing, but I'm kind of curious.
You're the only one I know of that has a blanket prohibition on it in the zoning ordinance, but there may be others.
I think there are. And I know the communities I'm familiar with that have them, they hate them. When they get them, it kind of puts the ZBA, they're not prepared, they don't necessarily, they feel like they're put in a position because it is somewhat of a rezoning that, you know what I mean, that they're not necessarily, a lot of times they're contentious, sites, and they can be, kind of heated.
And our BZA doesn't meet that. When's the last time our BZA met?
Well, they meet every month if there's a request.
Right.
I know, but when was the last time there was a request?
It's been several months.
Because it is good zoning.
They're meeting next
Well, that's because your zoning ordinance works very well.
I know. But
the point is they may be rusty because they're not meeting regularly. If I think, right? Is that your point?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, I mean, and it's not a big deal, staff. It's something we're not going to live or die with. It's just a tool that's out there that we weren't quite sure why we didn't have the ability to at least consider it if the opportunity presented itself. What we hate to do is have to go back and try to do this if the opportunity, if it really is necessary, we really feel it's appropriate for a site, we don't have it. And we can't even suggest it. And we don't want to go through that with the specter of a project hanging over it, because then it looks like we're doing it project specific. So we would never want to do that. In fact, we talked about it with St. James, but we didn't want to do it to look like we were accommodating St. James. We figured we'd let that go run its own course and then come back and talk about it later. But right now, we could have something walk in the door that it is technically perfect for, and that we want to at least consider it, and we can't.
Commissioner, you had a comment?
Doesn't it just merely change where you ask for the permission? I mean, basically, it just moves it. I can bring a variance now instead of asking for either a conditional rezoning, of the ordinance. I mean, it just changes the only thing to me it changes is who's deciding and where you ask. And I don't know, and pardon me if it's just because I don't know, but isn't that all it's effectually doing? Or is there a time process?
No, I don't think it's actually a timing issue. I think more of Derek has said there is a difference between, the unnecessary hardship and what they have to show to get it. And said there could be different conditions, whereas it is very similar to the questions that Commissioner Baker was asking about. Conditional rezoning and use variance are somewhat similar tools to get to the same objective.
Right. But doesn't that create even more difficulty? If we turn it into the application for a use variance, then we've got to climb the hurdle of hardship, which is the strictest, as far as I understand. And when you're doing a conditional rezoning, you don't even have to deal with it.
And our point is we do believe there's the possibility for circumstances to arise where one should have to go meet that level of a variance and go through that process, and where the underlying property should not be rezoned. That it's that specific and that unique to that site, that's the more appropriate process. Rarely should it happen. Like I said, in 15 years, I've only seen 2 of them go forward. It's a very rare standard. But we did just run into circumstances where we considered it. And the fact that we didn't have it available made us take pause and think about, do we really want to take that off the table?
I think I'm still a little, oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, quick question. So is this, has this just come up recently? So you said that there are 2 times. Has this, been sort of coming out of the idea that Ferndale's getting more development and whatnot, or has this been, discussed previously, or do you anticipate this becoming more of an issue going forward?
Well, the city attorney and I have discussed it internally before. My personal opinion is I never take a tool off the table. It's a city-controlled tool. There's competent boards and commissions here that follow the process. You have to have faith that that's the case with your city council, your planning commission, the BZA. We all know that that's not always the case, but that's not a reason not to have the tool either. In those instances, then the planning commission should make recommendations to the city council that the BZA is acting inappropriately, that, and those type of things do take place, but the response to it is not to take the tool away and just say you don't get to have this. Again, this is my opinion. No, it's not in response to a lot of discussion or any anticipation of more issues arising. In fact, if this were changed and the ordinance amended, I'd say there's a good chance I could work here another 10 years and never see an example where we recommended this course of action, especially because of the inclusion or the change in law that allows conditional rezoning. Almost everything before that I would have thought about as a use variance can now be handled by conditional rezoning because you can apply those strict criteria to them. So I don't foresee this. I don't think this is something in anticipation. It was only because it's not there and to have this discussion without the specter of a reason to have it.
All right. Well, I think, if that staff desires to put that tool back on the table, if you guys want to bring it forward, obviously we have 3 more commissioners that could weigh in, and I think we have some mixed feelings, but maybe if you want to maybe do some research instead and see what other communities are doing. I think the best thing you said tonight for me on this that helps sway my opinion is we're supposed to be detracting our focus on use and more on form if we're going to a form-based code, which is a very good point, Derek. So we should be more focused on the form.
Well, started Derek.
I struggled with it. I've struggled with it myself.
So I appreciate that comment because I haven't thought about it in that light. But I do hesitate about giving what I see as somewhat of a rezoning power to the ZBA and skirting the city council and planning commission.
Understood.
But in the good news, it is if someone doesn't like our answers before they sue us, they would have to now exhaust all the remedies and would have to go to
that's an enormous point that
it would be another hurdle that would deter people from suing us in the future.
And it adds to the case. It adds to the protection. That's actually an enormous point I didn't even bring out, and I don't know if everybody understands it. In land use, and Josh can speak to this a little bit too, I'm sure. Before you can
be more arbitrary.
Well, no. Before you can sue a city after a denial, the courts require you to exhaust all of your options within the city. Right now, if you deny someone a rezoning, they don't have to apply for a use variance. They can go directly to circuit court to sue us. With a use variance on the books, they have to go through that process as well, which gives the city attorney another opportunity to establish the reasons why, or if there's a very specific set of circumstances that's what's being requested is acceptable under a variance condition, you can even further refine it and prevent the lawsuit and the cost that goes along with it.
So if we really step out of bounds, the ZBA can correct us.
Well, it does give you the opportunity, and the ZBA is the only quasi-legal body in the city. It does give you that's actually a fantastic point. It does give you a further opportunity to narrow down the applicant's ability to make a good case that you guys are being arbitrary and capricious, because you can narrow it further through a use variance without rezoning the underlying property, which may be a concern if someone's going, let's say, to industrial in a residential district. Right now, if you deny them, they can jump right to court. With a use variance, they can. We've taken that away from ourselves without having the use variance option in here. Okay.
Just to comment on what I was thinking, it's not like it adds some quick route. I mean, it's a higher standard, and then it comes back for approval as well. So. Not really.
It gives me some heartburn, but
all right, well,
I can be convinced.
Yeah, we don't want to belabor it. We brought it here to make sure that it wasn't 8. Don't even talk to us about it. We did this for a reason. We don't want to see it. I wasn't going to do it then. It's not worth it. But if there's some, we'll talk about it with the city attorney a little more. Maybe revise it, talk about it a little more, and then potentially bring it back at a later date.
I will offer, and this is pure speculation, but speculation based in knowing who used to be on the BZA, that it was. My guess is that any number of things may have motivated our prior planning director to just shut it down.
And that's usually what it happens. It's a run-amok BZA sidestepping the zoning ordinance is usually how it
Speculation,
happens.
but it's outside of the realm of what has happened in the past in Ferndale. So just because we've got a planning commission full of, planning-related professionals now doesn't mean that that's always.
I guess one thought I would have too, and it looks like the language here is the standard law that you've probably seen in every community that has a use variance language. If we could maybe beef it up a little bit more, clarifying or specifying that, maybe an optional planning commission meeting to discuss before going there, or clarifying that following a use variance site plan process. Just kind of bringing it back.
Understood.
To the planning commission to a degree.
Understood.
I like that.
Not a step, but just that you can encourage them verbally to come.
Well, I'll find out if you can even require them to go to a discussion with a recommendation from the planning commission first, like a special land use.
I think that would help the ZBA.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, I don't think the ZBA wants this without talking to you guys, so.
Right. So just a thought.
Okay. All right.
I mean, it's another meeting, but the applicant would have to go through.
Yeah, we're talking about one in decades usually.
Right. Hopefully we won't have to deal with it. But.
Correct. I
Okay.
like your point about the exhausting all options.
Are you good with the direction on that for use
Absolutely.
variances, or any other comments on
Nope.
that? All right, let's bring it to the fun one of the downtown Ferndale overlay district. So this, I'm assuming, is a response to our
a very
joint
short,
meeting in August.
I'm not going to throw that city attorney under the bus, but a very short response to a very long wait and a very long question. What you have in front of us is the mechanism, and what we talked about, which isn't bad. It's not. But there's been a lot of discussion. I won't go back all through it all, but is to try to put in some kind of stipulation for development along the Woodward corridor specific is what this is set up to be. That will help achieve the goals of the master land use plan. That is a more high-density, transit-oriented development-style corridor along the Woodward corridor. There's been recent buildings that have been built that, although they're technically compliant with our zoning ordinance, don't meet the intent, or in several folks' belief, don't meet the intent of what that master plan is for that corridor. So in response to that, in discussions with the city attorney, we discussed 2 or 3 options that came out from our workshop meeting as related to special land uses, incentives and all that. And what we decided to bring forward as a recommendation, I think, is one the Planning Commission was the most supportive of that meeting as well, is that is an overlay zoning district that would require 2 stories, or he just threw in a number. I mean, the number is to be decided by the Planning Commission. I think it's 25 feet in here. And then also it would require this ordinance to kick in upon a 25% expansion of any existing building, or obviously any new building constructed along the corridor.
That is the 25 low-ish.
That's for your, because that's a hard number to come by.
Hard number.
Yeah, because 25% of 1,000 square feet is very different than 25% of 10,000 square feet. So you know the impact of it depending on the size of the existing space. And we talk, and one point would need to be clarified as well is that we're talking about 25% of the building space, not an individual tenant space. So it would be if there was an expansion or any change that altered 25% of the building, because tenant build-outs can change within the building.
These buildings are very small.
And it doesn't have to be a set number like that. You could do a ratio of, building the size to percentage.
Mike, lean up to the mic. New guy. So we get it on tape, just in case I need it later.
No, I mean, it obviously, just to kind of start that off, is that the percentage, I mean, you can do multiple different variations or formulas to create the desired result of a building having to meet that. I guess just this one other comment I have, the intent, as I understood it, is to create, density in the downtown. But what I would be concerned about is who, as far as a developer, are we locking out by doing this? Is there a small business group or small family or mom and pop, whatever you want to call it, that potentially would be nixed or not able to build or be a part of a project if that were a requirement that we were, given the kind of want that we have that solo or family-based or individualized business in the area, would changing or creating an overlay district, what effect would that have? That's one we're at.
The funny part of that is that the mom and pop business is the one that was just sitting here that put 3 years of blood, sweat, and passion into the most gorgeous building ever across the street, and the property developer who leases out his space here and in Troy and in Akron is the one who could not be persuaded with a wheelbarrow full of money to put 2 stories on Woodward.
Yes.
Like that, I totally get it, but it's not what we saw, but it's a really good question.
Well, I think that's what prevented us from doing it originally. I mean, we talked about this at length when we drafted this ordinance, and then we had, at the time, we had a developer on board who was talking about, you know, this dollar amount equals this square footage, and, you know, trying to really figure out financially who would we shut down, you know.
So we didn't make arbitrary numbers,
So that was why it was never done to begin with. It was talked about, and then we shied away from it because of, when did we do this? Was there a date on this?
We did this in
Economy was definitely part of it.
It was before 10, was it?
I think it was adopted in 10. I think it was signed at 10.
Yeah, you were in the throes of the Great Recession.
No, it was 8 or 9, because our
It was before, I think it was before the Great Recession.
Our 5 years is up, so it's got to be March.
When it was approved, yeah.
That's got to be an update.
Yeah, that's not an updated version or something?
I don't know. I wasn't here. Oh, I mean, I lived here.
You were
but
here.
I came and yelled at you guys in the middle of it. But
No, our master plan, 5-year master plan
Don't
update
create
expired December
nonconformance.
31st.
But this is the master plan. This is I'm talking about the zoning ordinance discussion, not the
Oh,
master
zoning.
plan. This was when we did the zoning ordinance. But,
Can I just make a comment to follow up with Kate's
Never mind, I'll
comment?
give you the master. Sure.
Was, though, yes, Black Owl looks gorgeous and they're putting a ton of money into it, it's also, I guess they are adding the second story component, but not to the extent that we might be requiring, I guess, with the height.
Yeah, but our concern was like the existing toast. Does it have 2 stories?
Yeah.
But Pennant didn't. Okay, it only had 1 story, and they wanted to expand because they were very successful. Would this tie their hands to expanding if they had to go 2 stories? It was kind of the concern. I think you were just, raising a successful business that just wants to expand a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, that came up in the 25%, you know, in my brain is that, well, if I've got a 2,000 square foot store and I want to add a, 500 square feet in the back, suddenly I'm required to go up 2 stories, thousands of square feet, whether it's either in facade or whatever kind of requirements you have that. The burden, a lot of those downtown spaces, one that comes into play really quick that I think of is the spot that was right next to the right of Dino's. It was a little, some sort of mixed-use retail space. They were selling hats and stuff like that. If the tenant wants to build out 50 feet or 100 feet on that building, you're hitting a requirement really quick that whose responsibility is it? Is now the tenant, because now the building, whoever owns that building is saying, well, I'm not going to let you do that because then I got to build another story on this joint.
It makes me think of Rouge, for example. She just expanded into a budding storefront, right? She knocked a hole in the wall, but if she were to bump out, Cheryl and I talk about these things, right? So if she were to go back, let's say take the little building to the back alley, that would certainly trigger this.
Well, again, I think a lot of this discussion is going to talk about and we haven't talked about this yet, what the geography is of this overlay district is, because obviously I think we're primarily concerned, we're talking about the Woodward frontage, recognizing the transit coming up and down Woodward, that we really wanted to focus density on Woodward. And so a lot of those lots, like I think, the shop, most of those are pretty much, Woodward to the back. I mean, they almost have to go up in order to expand, because there isn't a whole lot of room.
Well, that's the point of clarification that I want to make sure we're clear on. Rouge is a perfect example. Let's say Rouge is, it's on Woodward. I mean, it's on the corridor. This would apply to that. Buildings, even though they look like one building in a continuous block, may be multiple buildings, and we have a lot of that in the city. And there's fill-in in the back. There is the potential for one building owner to buy a building with a common wall that's adjacent and knock that building out and double their space. The way this is written, that would be an expansion of the building by more than 25% because you would be combining those 2 buildings into one. I don't think that's our intent.
That scenario.
I want to make clear that I think there's a way to write that to make it clear, but that's not our intent here. We want that to allow that to happen without having to go up.
Right. We're talking about physical building expansion. Right. Increasing the square footage.
Or removing a
of the footprint.
And exempting if they buy a building with expansion, we got to make clear that expansion doesn't include the removal of a common wall between 2 buildings.
Yes. I think it's the addition of square footage to a building.
Okay. But those would be 2 buildings. You'd be adding a whole other building. You'd be expanding one building by combining 2.
Right. Adding physical footprint to the ground.
Well,
Okay.
not-
That'd be the only
You don't have-
instance.
you don't have to
I do.
about breaking an external
Okay,
wall.
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but physical footprint, that the expansion of the building does not include removing a common wall to combine two
Yes.
existing buildings. Okay, that
I-
clarifies that.
I'm sorry to be devil's
Yeah.
advocate here, but I mean,
Devil's
so
advocate.
then what do we have? Dino's that goes down 7 storefronts now?
They're about to go down another one, aren't they?
They could, yeah.
You know, and then they don't have to meet this requirement because they can just continuously buy
I
out
think
the
that's
next
the
door. I
intent of
mean,
what I'm saying.
one of the other intents is that you have multiple uses. I mean, if you expand into the next space, I think that you're the one who's capable of affording that, then you're the one who should be going up.
Maybe there could be a higher, like I said, a percentage, or at least if you physically, more than double or, buy a space that's larger than your current space.
Yeah, that is interesting, because you do encourage a super user to go, to
Lateral.
to spend the money to buy up along the frontage,
Right, instead of going
as
up.
instead of working with their existing building owner to build up.
There could be a threshold of when that was triggered in, that once you have a certain
Makes me think of the dollar
square
store.
footage, or, because we don't encourage, I can't remember, we have some language in there about not allowing like retail over certain square footage, don't we? Like kind of to discourage big box, like over 70,000 square feet or something of that nature.
We used to have language about not
I don't
allowing
remember, because I've never dealt with it, I don't remember what's in there.
retail over a certain amount of square footage, because there used to be a problem with sort of junk shops, antique shops and stuff, but I think we
Yeah.
changed that.
I'm not talking about that, but I think there was definitely
The
discussion
big
about
box
language
one.
about deterring large-scale big box, and I thought there was some.
I'm sure there's something, but I don't think I think this will fall down below that probably.
Right, but I'm saying
square
similar, you
footage,
could put in a threshold that over a certain percentage or square footage that you would then be looking to go up.
Well, not to change the tone
Or
of this, but
complicate it,
instead of,
though.
because on a lot of these things, everyone's like, oh, we need to deter. Maybe we don't deter, but we build in an incentive. If you want to create more of a lateral space, it's got to be a different use, or you've got to become, something that, let's, just talking about, promoting, like, yeah, we want you to have this space, but we want, this multiple use here. We don't want you to be, Bennigan's across the whole front of Woodward. We want you to be maybe.
You said that the hair on the back of my neck.
But
But I try not to worry about signs,
then
too.
you
We
look-
talk
but then
about
you
that
look
all the
at-
time. Users change all the time. It's hard to write an ordinance based on potential users.
And again, you don't want to discourage potential local businesses that are expanding.
Yeah.
Treat Dreams, Como's, they've occupied multiple spaces, they move, maybe Valentine, you know what I mean? Like,
No,
these
that's
businesses that
exactly the opposite.
expanding, that
Right.
you want to encourage their expansion.
Yeah, I think we can write that. I mean, I get that the intent is not to prevent businesses from expanding one building to the other laterally and be required to go up by that.
Are there any parking square footage correlations here that we could maybe incent? I like the incenting idea.
Yeah, I
so-
like going up.
So that if you were to expand laterally, does that in any way change your parking requirements
No, 'cause you're exempt
outside
from
of the
CBD.
CBD? But what if we
Yeah,
went
careful,
north of-
'cause we- yeah, just-
But what
we-
if we went north of Camborne in this overlay? Then you're outside of that parking, and so.
Yeah,
what if
you
we-
have two
what if
different
we
set of
said-
zoning requirements
what
here.
if we said if you go up, you don't have to meet these additional parking requirements? Or something, that would, because that would certainly be costly and burdensome to, and, sort of wasteful of your space, to acquire something to accommodate your parking, when if you went up, we would.
I like where you're going with the
And-
language.
and-
Instead of
Yeah, I don't know
making
what
it
parking is,
forceful, instead of like, oh, if you
I
do
don't know what
this,
the right
you
piece is.
have to go up.
But we do have already in the ordinance, if you're in CBD, you're exempt, and you guys have the ability to waive upon your discretion.
But if we
In
stop at
C2
CBD, we wouldn't have addressed the Ashmore site.
No, I mean, but even in C2 now, you have the ability to waive. You could waive it if they go up. You already can do that. So I mean, it's difficult to just waive it because they go up. I mean, that's not really a reason, but you already have the ability if they provide enough and they say, we don't want to meet the parking standards required by ordinance because we're going to build additional, you guys could already consider that and do that based on submitted
Can
information.
we explicitly incentive?
Well, I think, in terms of ways to provide incentives for development, usually you see height bonuses.
Yeah, like I said, when we talked about it, and if we use the Ashmore site as the focal point of it, I mean, and we talk about incentives, whether I could have accomplished it or not, I have no idea, but literally had the conversation with him about paying to build the second story and either reimbursing them through TIF and that's how we kind of came back to the discussion about requiring it, is because even presented with unrealistic incentives, it didn't meet their pro forma at the time. Whether I could have delivered it or not, but it was kind of a test to see how far we could go with what it would take to get someone to do it in that location.
Yeah, we have, the issue is we have strip mall developers who are eyeing property on Woodward, who aren't interested in actually
Right.
doing higher density, no matter what we throw at them.
Yeah.
And bags.
Including free money.
And bags.
Right, well, and that's specifically my worry, like, if they were to get a hold of some building down.
Old Navy,
Yeah,
whole
and then
block.
suddenly, you know,
Yeah.
they're just buying the store next to them, and then it's like Verizon Wireless and then T-Mobile, and then they buy the store next to them, and they're like, we don't have to go up, I'm just.
Well, right now, and there's another good example. That building is one building. Rust Belt to the corner through Angyo, and then the next building is L1. Nothing in this would prohibit from a single user from buying that building
And occupying all of it.
and occupying all of it. They don't have to go up to do that, because they wouldn't be expanding by 25%. The building is the out four wall. I mean, it's not the tenant space build-outs in the interior.
I think I'm okay with that because it's an existing building. The two projects that we're talking about are removing a building.
Yeah.
And had no building.
Mhm.
So I know we don't have a lot of those properties here, but, you know, someone could remove something.
Take down that little crummy Huntington Bank and put in.
Right? And
No, this would do it for that. In those instances, in those very nimble, this would have covered the Ashmore site, the Pizza Hut site, a complete scrape and rebuild, and anybody who adds 25% floor area to their building. Now, what we can put in here is we can put a lot of language that and a complete scrape and rebuild is required, but that the 25% stuff can be waived by you guys upon request. You know, I mean, if someone comes in and demonstrates, and that gives you guys the ability to waive that request, unless otherwise approved by the Planning Commission, an expansion to 25%.
That's something that wouldn't usually come to us. That would usually be an administrative approval. It's like an engineering.
No, anything over 25%. It says if you're building a certain percentage, and you're required to do it unless. The internal stuff. I'm not hearing that being the issue.
Okay.
So, and this doesn't deal with the internal expansion even between building and building. And we'll write it to make sure it's clear that it doesn't. But if the concern is that you're going to tie something up that you don't want to, we can put the 25% in unless otherwise waived by the Planning Commission.
And then give them some criteria that they demonstrate.
We can make it real loose and just make it your guys' call, because there's going to be so few and rare of them, at least in general, or we can put very specific criteria, 10 very specific. Either way, that way you guys have the option. The only thing I get nervous about criteria is we won't think of every opportunity you won't want to
You
waive.
can do the catch-all at the end, or any
Correct.
other condition that the planning. But I think we should guide them that we're looking for. If they're not going to do this, then we want to make sure they've
Quality
LED,
architecture, unique
they've done
redesign.
stormwater management. They're
some of
leading
those
best
types of
practices.
things. Yep, absolutely.
Things like that.
Okay.
That were really high. They need to be that best project we've ever seen.
And
then-
including but not all potentially,
Mhm.
you know, and not limited to and not all, that kind of thing. But give them
Such
6 or
as.
7. Yeah, I like that.
But whatever we do, it would need to be in a direction that we're comfortable heading with the master planning and then potentially a zoning ordinance update. Because if we get into, I mean, you were just talking about a lot of sort of form and design things, which I think is the direction we want to go anyway. But we wouldn't want to do this and then 2 years later totally.
Right.
And this doesn't get in the way of this, I don't think, because I really don't. I think it's a nice stopgap. Because the master land use plan is great, but it doesn't, and it may set the tone, and I think whatever comes out of that will support this. But not only that, but
be looked at
the rezoning,
all over
the
again.
ordinance updates that come along with it is going to be another year on the back end of that.
Right.
So this fills that stopgap measure that you guys wanted, and I understand would have liked to have been in place prior to the Pizza Hut, but it does fill that requirement. I think it does at least. Now, the interesting discussion is this is a rezoning. This is not just a ordinance amendment. All the building owners will have to be noticed that this change has taken place. And there'll be a public hearing on the rezoning. We're changing the zoning of the property and the criteria, so this means we have to have them all understand this as well.
Which
Okay.
again goes back to the original question of what are our limits that we're talking about here? Because I don't think we're clear on that, because the CBD zoning district is different than the DDA boundaries.
And whatever this
And
overlay.
the Woodward corridor.
Right, and the CBD boundaries isn't Camborne, it's Breckenridge.
Yeah.
So it's not even,
No, CBD doesn't cover the former Ashmore site.
No.
That's C2.
I thought it stopped at the south corner.
no.
It stops at Tree Trees.
Correct.
Right, and, I mean, going south on Woodward, it stops at the Saratoga on the south side of the, so, I mean, it's definitely what you think of the downtown is not what CBD is. And so I think it's got to go beyond the CBD boundaries.
So would it go like all of Woodward then?
That's
9 miles.
That's what we have to figure out,
Okay.
because CBD, if you can see, is like that kind of magenta, and then the light pink is C2, which was basically
And then the TIF districts.
everything on Woodward other than the CBD. And that's if we give ourselves a C3, which is our most liberal.
CBD should be 3 stories and then C2 too.
Oh, you're really. All right, guys, are you guys listening to this at all? Side conversation?
Use your gavel.
So what I realized I was thinking of, and Melanie's going to crawl under the table when I say this, but what I realized I was thinking of was the principal shopping district proposal. And the reason that the principal shopping district, which of course was adding another and different layer to all of these boundaries that already exist in terms of our overlay and financing districts, the reason it went to Marshall and Camborne, and specifically the north side of the Camborne intersection and the south side of the Marshall intersection, was that those were very specific sort of entrance nodes of the city in terms of height and density and downtown welcoming amenity development. And that's what I was thinking of, was the PSD boundaries, and that is scary.
Well, what we talked about on our main discussion over here.
I'm thinking of a Woodward. So when I think of a
You mean the less important?
When I think of a Woodward overlay, I think of those entrance nodes.
So like that, that's what we need to carefully look at what the zoning is. And our comment was, well, the CBD is obviously smaller than what we visualize it to be, and that the C2 is kind of this, is the primarily
long and low.
Most of Woodward, but the C3 caps at the ends for those adult-oriented businesses, by Pleasant Ridge and by 8 Mile. But
Pleasant Ridge wants that.
But our new commissioner suggested maybe in the CBD proper would be a 3-story minimum. And that's what I'm listening to you guys all this.
So do you talk to Luke Forrest?
That's I mean, I think we were trying to just start out small because we were so hesitant to even go to the 2-story to begin with. And recognize there's a lot of businesses in the CBD that are 2-story already that would meet this without too much heartache.
I mean, I think I would go back on a 3-story kind of just as an idea is that I think building in incentives to go higher density is the way to accomplish it. Working with developers in the past, whenever they get told that they have to do something, it's like the most, it's the most horrible thing they hear, and it's like the most certain thing to make them not want to do it.
Right.
Any individual business owner that gets told they have to do something, it's an immediate, reaction to that. Oh, you're telling me I have to do this. Whereas when you incentivize the plan and make, density the goal and kind of trick them into it, it's kind of a better. And when you say, hey, you build 3 stories, we'll work with you on this.
But the incentive has to be strong, as Derek mentioned. If it's not, they'll just say, oh, well, still, it's not worth it for me to get your extra.
Right, because our ordinance does allow for higher. I mean, obviously we're talking, mandating minimums here, but we can go up to, I think 70 feet is our highest at certain right in the downtown areas. So we do kind of have a step down, concentrating density at 9 in Woodward. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a great discussion that I think we should have as part of our zoning ordinance update. But I think the intent of this was to just do the stopgap to prevent single-story strip center type development along Woodward in the meantime. So without overly complicating it.
Well, then I think it should definitely expand beyond the CBD.
Right. So I think, would our comments be, could we do it an overlay district for the CBD district in its entirety and all properties fronting onto Woodward?
Oh.
That would just be the whole Woodward corridor. Oh, you guys want to do this on 9 Mile too?
That's what Sarah just said.
That's what I was asking.
But CBD would cover Troy and Vester too, right? And part of Wheaton.
Pretty much CBD is everything that fronts on the 9 Mile with exception of the One-Eye Betty's block, basically.
Troy, not Vester?
South side of Vester, CBD.
Oh, sorry, south side of Vester, yes. So if those buildings were to redevelop, they would have to be 2-story, which I think is appropriate.
Or they fill in that parking lot?
Yeah, but Valentine Vodka isn't. That's mixed.
That's MXD.
That's already 2 stories.
Valentine is?
No, it's just a really tall old factory.
Yeah, it's old pool table.
Wolverine.
But yeah, so I guess that was my starting discussion would be the CBD and all properties fronting onto Woodward. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Because that would include the old Blockbuster strip center.
Oh, it goes on that far?
No, that's
I don't think it goes
I lied.
Too. I wish
No, it's
I wish
Ferndale
it would.
Foods. Sorry.
I wish it would, because then it would encompass that Ferndale Foods Save a Lot everything discussion. But I don't think it goes as far as.
You're right.
Blockbuster.
It stops at Livernois.
Yeah.
That actually might just, those properties are pretty high value for developers, and so they might actually not need this overlay to encourage
So it might be
development.
harmless. is what you're saying.
Yeah, it might, harmful.
It might provide a good example for us.
And I like the idea of making that Black with Valentine inclusive into that. I mean, I think what we need to do is look outside of the current CBD and think of where do we want this growth to go and kind of create a new line maybe. You know?
I think that, I agree, big picture, long term.
I thought that
When we
was restricted
look
because
at
of
the ordinance, I think for this immediate purpose, is trying to redefine the boundaries of everything. Just to, that the pressure we're getting is on Woodward.
Potential negatives, not that I
I mean, the Valentine vodka, I don't think is going anywhere immediately, nor the Embrew.
The whole block.
That area gets a little sensitive to me because
Yeah, the only one I can think of off the top of my head that's in
We'll go with the
CBD.
major roads.
I agree with you there.
The only one I can think of the top of my head that might have a negative impact of, and I'd want to go through and look at them, and we would before we brought them back, once we had the geography base, is the church across the street. They have green space, they're single story, and you wouldn't want to force them to go up 2 stories with that building if they were to build an addition and do an adaptive reuse
That's
of the
when they come
building.
to planning commission for their.
As long as there's a criteria, you can waive it in unique circumstances. I don't think
If
there's
you
any.
build in-
9 Mile scares me, West 9 Mile scares me more than Woodward does. It has the potential to do, but I can't think of anything off the top. We'll look at it, though. If you guys want to apply this to the CBD in Woodward, we'll do a little more careful spot parcel and do some
Well, I guess it's
looking.
worth looking at before
Yeah.
we bring it back.
Okay.
I mean, I think at the minimum we'd want all Woodward frontage, but I think
Yeah,
it's
for
worth
sure, I
it
think so.
For all the reasons we talked about, everything we want in downtown. We want, I think CBD on 9 Mile, well, CBD in general. 'Cause I mean, if that whole block Troy developed, that building
It
next to
doesn't
it.
have negative impact on Detroit. I don't think it really impacts Western nicely. The collision shop, their addition wasn't more than 25%, so it would have been fine. The glass shop, White Heather, nothing on the north side, either VFW Hall. I mean, if VFW Hall were to buy, let's see, the 2 net properties next door, knock down the single-family homes, and want to do a 1-story addition to Embrew, they could potentially impact them, potentially.
But that gets me a little nervous because now we're reaching into the residential neighborhood.
Well, that's zone mixed use.
Right, but
Yeah.
it's not zone CBD, so we're not
Yeah.
talking about that.
Oh, that's right, the north side is MXD, so it wouldn't apply.
Right.
Which was a benefit.
south side, yeah, south
was
side
a
would-
benefit when.
Originally, that block wasn't even incorporated. That was residential. That was a last minute ad because of Valentine.
A good call, though.
So, yeah, we're good. Okay, so are you guys comfortable with the direction of a draft to bring forth for a public hearing? And I guess before we do a public hearing, are you going to do an outreach with the business community so that this is blindsided?
I need to talk to
Building
council
owners, yeah.
about what they.
How are we rolling this out?
And how does this
Oh, yeah.
impact
Let me
all of
talk
the
to
current brouhaha you
Yeah,
guys
I
have
need
to
to
sit
talk
through?
to council. They wanted us to bring a recommendation from planning commission, and now we need to weigh that against current circumstances.
Okay, well, are we going to have a meeting, you think, in November?
You're not going to, you mean put this on the agenda for council for discussion, or you're talking about offline? Okay, thank you, yeah. Okay. I don't want to get the perception of you guys discussing this without a notice,
No,
yeah.
I guess my thought would be, if we have a November meeting, I know we don't want to keep on pushing this off, but if we have a November meeting, if we could come back with maybe a memo in addition to just some draft language that's maybe a little more,
Yeah, but not the public hearing at that point.
no, just,
Okay.
and then we could re-recommend this, re-recommend this.
Okay. We won't notice it but without coming back and talk to you guys more and making some refinements to this and bringing back a final version in November.
Right, well, there can be, like I said, an intent memo, so
Yep.
if this gets out to the public, they kind of understand the rationale, it's not just a blind side.
Understood?
Okay.
Understood.
Any other discussion on the,
Important with Pleasant Ridge.
so it's not really the downtown Ferndale overlay district, this is more of the, this is Woodward corridor, it's, you need to think about a different name for it.
Yeah, because we were focused on just the Woodward corridor, but if it's going to expand, we need to
Right, because here it
change
says
it.
downtown Ferndale, right, which,
Yeah.
yeah, it's more than that, it's really a,
It does tend to apply to the downtown, the perceived downtown. If we throw our boundaries out the window, what the properties that, if you were to ask anybody, are
downtown.
considered to be part of the expanded or the length and breadth of the downtown.
Right, but
So
this
I
is-
think that's a good name for it.
beyond that, though, it's also all the way down, we're saying all the properties on Woodward.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
more-
but I think we can call it downtown from a working title or a name, because everybody perceives all those properties. They don't know where the defined boundaries of the DDA, TIF districts, and that kind of
Right,
stuff.
but they don't think of the properties that are edges as downtown on Woodward.
You don't think so?
No.
I don't think the auto dealerships.
The Taco Bell, they don't think that's downtown.
I do. It's all zero, anything zero setback, I think of as downtown with parallel parking out
Well, you're a
front.
planner.
I know.
Okay.
Right.
Any other discussion on our downtown overlay district?
I think this is a really great start.
Yes, good work.
That's,
Yeah,
Help,
I'm so excited
Dan.
to see it.
Pleasant Ridge Master Plan. So obviously, they're updating their master plan as part of the Shared Planning Act. They have to share with all the neighboring communities. You guys saw it in your packet. I think it was very concise and attractive.
concise and attractive.
I didn't really read it.
It's not, never gets changed to it.
But it's a residential community. I'm assuming they want to protect that. And
I think you should request the new city manager come and present it to you.
You think so?
I think that's a great
Yeah,
idea.
I thought Ferndale should take a recommendation from the city on page 30. They would like windmills on Woodward. Their community strategy is a thriving multi-use, mixed-use frontage on Woodward Avenue with more commercial and retail opportunities. Great. Better parking and connectedness, slower traffic, and windmills.
Excuse, did you say windmill?
She did. Windmills.
Is that new?
It's page 30.
I know, but is that new or is that? I'm trying to figure if that's been in there for 60 years and they want like little.
I don't know.
They want, or they do they want small wind?
What do they know that we don't know?
In the Greenbelt?
Don't know. Maybe. Where is this at? I'm
Where's
on
the
page
fall
30.
radius
It's like
for
the
a
blue box,
windmill?
and the
Are
blue
you
box,
joking
and the
with me?
white. Up at the last.
Oh.
Maybe it's.
See, you said I wasn't going to miss anything interesting if I left.
I didn't. I'm going to ask.
Windmills, what the heck?
You're texting him right now.
Our
Are you
district
texting
overlay.
Jen?
Water wheel.
Did you call Ann?
Our district overlay would actually help their community.
I'm house sitting right
achieve
next door
some
to
of
him
their
right now. I can
objectives
just go
that they're
knock on his
stating in
door.
their master plan.
Excuse me, Mr. Breckman.
And maybe we could ask them to even continue on with the district overlay.
They've sent it to. It's been sent to them, and we've asked them if we're going to go forward with it. We've asked them if they're interested in considering taking it to the property lines, the border as well.
Okay. Pretty progressive for them.
Wow, windmills, there it is.
Windmills.
Yeah.
I'd like to see water wheels added.
I'm curious to me if that's new and that means small wind, or if that's something that's a remnant of their master plan from,
No,
like
I
as a decorative element. It's got to be new and mean.
I think it's
wind.
new. I mean, I haven't seen our
That
current plan.
satisfied someone who's extremely intent on incorporating sustainability practices along major road
Well,
corridors.
just-
There's not enough wind to do them there, I don't think.
Just
so.
a comment on
Fall
windmills,
radius,
though.
too.
If you look
Your
to
master plan.
the airport downtown, windmills aren't always as big.
No, you can do small wind.
You do,
Right.
I mean,
You can do
tons
small
of them.
wind.
They can be as like 3 feet by 2
I think
feet.
we allow residential, don't we?
We totally do, but I just, you picture all of a sudden one of these windmills on Woodward and all the residents showing up at Pleasant Ridge City Hall. What did you do?
Remember when they tried to put them in?
We need to
off the bed
plant this in the
Boston?
Pleasant Ridge Facebook forum.
Who did their master plan?
I think it's the remnants of their old one, and Jim did the update.
Yeah.
It's barely an update, I think, to what they had before.
They're going to have to be redevelopment ready, Derek.
Okay, so, I think typically
Are
we
we
usually make a
redevelopment?
motion,
Both.
we usually make a motion to, support
I don't know, I think this is the first one I've brought to you guys since.
No, we said Detroit like last month.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I must have, this is a long meeting.
Whatever it is, I think we usually, I think we made a
I was
motion
gonna
that,
drive conversation.
that we direct staff to draft the standard letter, appreciating, their outreach and that we commend their efforts for sustainable.
Okay, yes, you did do one last time, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so, I guess, someone follow my gist, want to make a motion along those lines?
It was just another right there. It's right there. That's it.
We have more topics to talk about, by the way. I was going to be adding a couple.
Gotta go get my tickets to see Hillary.
Does anyone make a motion to have direct staff to create a memo supporting?
I'll do it.
Okay, all right, I make a motion, oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
What was it? Sorry.
To direct staff to
Yes.
prepare
Okay,
the standard memo
Right, to direct
supporting.
staff to draft a memo to send to appreciate the submittance of the master plan, yeah?
Yeah.
All right, okay, sorry.
Yes, that's fabulous.
Awesome, yeah.
Okay, we have a motion and support. Do you guys follow the motion?
Yes.
I need, yes. but-
Do the same one from Detroit. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Before we adjourn, I did two quick things I want to talk about, sorry. Master plan update. Update for, did
Yes.
the interviews happen?
Yeah, no,
What
they have
happened?
not.
When are the interviews?
We've tried with great diligence to schedule them. They're scheduled for the 23rd. We'll be interviewing all five candidates. We hope to be able to select one from those interviews. I'm guessing more likely that we'll narrow it down to two and probably continue interviews after that before bringing forward a recommendation.
So
But
you're
those
doing
are taken. Go
five
ahead.
on the 23rd?
Correct.
And who's on the interview? I know we talked about who's on the panel. We have
Kevin, Mel, Deb, myself, Michelle, Jill from Parks and Rec, a representative from the DDA board.
Christina?
I don't know if she's going to be available. It'll probably be either her or Cindy. And then I think we're going to include Joe, our Chief Innovation Officers, because the ties to the website and some other things.
Okay.
He's at least going to sit in. We don't know if he's going to be actually part of the voting panel.
Okay.
But we're trying to keep it limited to 7
Yeah.
at tops, and that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, I just want, if you could maybe just add every month, master plan update,
That's fine.
so that we don't forget, I want, so we can.
Understood.
And then lastly, we have 2 new commissioners, so sorry, I mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting, but if you guys want to give us 2 minutes about yourselves and Ferndale and what you do and why you, I don't know, why you want to be on this highly organized, efficient board.
My name's Josh Farr, and I live at 180 Wordsworth, down just south of Marshall there on the east side, right behind the dealership. And I lived there for about just over 2 years now. I lived over on Lewiston and Leland before that, and I've lived in Ferndale on this stint for about 6 years now. So before that, I lived up north for a little bit, and I was on Breckenridge before that. So I grew up in Royal Oak. I went to Don Darrow High School, went to Central for my undergrad, and then I went to Thomas M. Cooley for law school. I worked in-house and became the general counsel for a property management firm. We owned and operated hotels in Texas, California, Florida, and Italy. We did the ownership and operation of those. Then we did purchasing of mixed-use office and residential properties, bought notes on apartment complexes, foreclosed them, and gained ownership. I dealt with all of the zoning and the code and basically application of everything for our company. And then I left there and started my own practice until I was picked up by the Mike Morris law firm, and I do civil litigation now and run a team at the Mike Morris law firm. And now I'm here. And I've always been a part of the Greens Party, and I donated my time during college and throughout my whole life as a volunteer, all through Ferndale and Michigan and wherever I lived, really. So that's it.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Katie. I'm from Grosse Pointe. Went to U of M undergrad, did poli-sci and urban studies. I was in Detroit a lot. I was really into the Metro Detroit area throughout all that. I did AmeriCorps in Detroit and worked with Michigan Historic Preservation Network. I'm a big historic nut, big planning nut. Love Jane Jacobs, as I'm sure probably everybody in this room can also agree. I've lived in Ferndale for about 2 years. After college, I moved down to New Orleans. I was working at the Preservation Resource Center there, getting historic zoning for, nervous. Historic designation on homes for owned by jazz musicians and things like that. And I've always been super into a lot of the historic stuff, going to the Detroit, historic.
So you know Kate Baker?
No, you look so familiar, and I was wondering, where, okay.
Yeah, you're going to love Kate.
Okay, we should probably introduce ourselves.
Yeah, we'll introduce ourselves after.
Reporting out to us.
Webster now. Love it. Yeah. And I just, love Ferndale, and it's, such a great city, and I'm so excited to be a part of this board and hopefully help direct it in a way that I think it's been going for a while, where it's, young, and it's, got so much diversity that I think is wonderful and makes it so unique for all the other, communities in Metro Detroit. So, yeah, I'm really excited.
Well, welcome. We're glad to have you. I think we pride ourselves as having a very progressive, young, forward-thinking board.
Yeah, which I can tell from the conversation.
I'm educated in planning related too. That was my big point of pride.
Engineering and architecture.
Yes. All right, well, I guess we'll do it.
Relevant.
Kevin, do you want to start? Give us your
expertise areas.
Yeah, I'm looking for things.
curriculum vitae.
Dover, work for SEMCOG, Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. Primarily do some transportation work, housing, community development, planner by trade. Wayne State, it seems like that's where you're going, or planning on going. So, good program. Several of us here went through that program, and I think we all got good things to say about it. Been on the Planning Commission for maybe 6 years now, resident for 7 years, 8 years. All you need to know about me. If you have other questions, just ask me.
I'm Melanie Piana. I've been on Planning Commission 5 years. Relates to my number of years on City Council. I have my master's degree from Wayne State, and I worked at the Suburbs Alliance for 9 years, which is where I got my feet wet into local government. Prior to that, I had no idea what local government did. And so I now work at the Downtown Detroit Partnership. I do a variety of work there, but I'm doing small business outreach to help mitigate their impact of M1 streetcar construction. So I'm dealing with parking and lots of other issues that the storefront businesses are dealing with.
I'm Sarah Roediger. I think I've been on it about 10 years now. I built a house here 10 years ago, and after I turned my water on, I came and turned in my application for a planning commission.
Awesome.
Yes, very exciting. I'm a Wayne State Master's grad of urban planning as well, the undergrad at University of Detroit Mercy, for architecture for a little bit, and then BS really after that. I think my degree's in sociology, so that's what my dad says.
I thought you meant something else.
Yeah, and then I worked as a consultant for most of my career, and then I hopped around Oakland County working for the planner for West Bloomfield, then Novi, and now I found my home at Derek's old job in Rochester Hills.
All right. Yeah. So I grew up here. I grew up in Pleasant Ridge and Ferndale. Left for school and came back, and now after 10 years, I finally it's like so close, I can taste it, almost had my master's essay done at Wayne. Like this is giving me a third extension. I had to beg the dean. It's a little extreme, but we got slightly off track with the master's when I was elected to the city council. So I was on the council in Ferndale. My background in education is in urban planning, but my work career has been in nonprofit fundraising and in economic development, and then the managing director of the Detroit Historical Society, which is why Kristen wondered. So, I don't know, I hired Derek.
Technically, a big group of them hired me at one time.
And Derek hired Michelle. And stole Barb. So, the planning and community development team has gone through some pretty significant changes in the last few years, and I think it's really shaken out into, in addition to this planning commission being awesome, but the planning and community development team at the city is, developers love to work with them, except for the people that we try to make do crazy things.
Good developers like to work with.
Because they want to be in the city, they want to be in a city that wants to work with them and is responsive and gets things done. And not only are we a desirable location, but we have a desirable team. So that's one of the reasons I like being on the plan.
We're great. Yay. So you guys know Derek? Have you met with him?
They've listened to me ad nauseum at this point. They've heard everybody does. But yes, they have. We've had a couple of extensive meetings with both of them, and are just extraordinarily pleased to have them with us. I mean, you guys know it from being here for so long. I've lived here for 15 years too. I mean, we're constantly stunned at the talent and the especially in the planning field, and the desire to have good, urban, responsible professionals here. The city draws them like flies. I think that's for a reason. They come here, they want to live here, and then when they live here, they want to get involved here. So they're everywhere. So if you like planning and you like everything associated with planning, whether it's preservation or road design or housing or whatever it is, this community seems to have people in spades that are interested in that, and I think that's for a very good reason. So I think these guys will make great additions.
You guys have all met Barb?
Hello.
All of your emails come from her.
She keeps us organized.
Yeah, and then Michelle, you got a chance to meet our new commissioners? Tell a little bit about yourself.
I work here.
Oh, so go ahead. Okay. All right. I guess any other commission items? Otherwise,
Michelle gets to go to Mexico tomorrow.
nice. All right, we adjourn. 9:22.
She gets to go to Mexico, I get to go to Hillary.
Nice, I love it.
Longer than council.
I know, well, I didn't go to see the First Lady because I had a meeting with a trustee, and